Hey guys, tonight, you are not Laura. Tonight, you are her mother. You are Caroline Ingalls, and you are about to walk through the 2 hardest years of your life. The years when a railroad, a sickness, and a strip of raw Dakota prairie almost break you for good. This is the winter your world changes. This is the move to Dakota that nearly kills you. Dim your lights, get comfortable, let your shoulders drop. Breathe in slowly. And now, step back to the spring of 1879. You wake to the sound of coughing in the next room. The little house in Walnut Grove is still half dark, that grey-blue hour before the sun finds its way through plain glass and thin curtains. The air smells of yesterday's ashes and the faint sourness of damp wool drying by the stove. Sa-kahi, the boards are cold under your bare feet as you swing your legs out of bed. You hear it again. Not the little ordinary cough of a child with a tickle in her throat, a deep, dragging sound. Mary. You move quickly now. Your skirt brushes the floor. Your fingers find the wall in the half-light as you cross the room. Laura stirs on her straw-tick mattress and then goes still. She has learned not to complain when you move past her in the dark. When you reach Mary, your hand finds her forehead before your eyes really see her face. The heat knocks the breath out of you. Her skin is burning. Not just warm from sleep, but hot in a way that makes your heart seize. Hot like a skillet pulled too long from the fire. Her hair is damp against the pillow, stuck in little curls at her temples. Her breath comes fast and shallow. "Mary," you whisper. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes flutter open, unfocused. "Ma?" The word is thin and strange on her lips. Then her face twists with pain. Her hand goes to her head. It hurts. You know fever. You have lived with fevers all your life. Aches that shake a body until the teeth rattle. Chills that sink into bones. You have nursed babies through them, neighbours through them. But this feels wrong in a way you can't name yet. You call for Charles, your voice sharper than you mean it to be. He's already awake. He always is when one of you isn't breathing quite right. Boots hit the floor behind you. The stove lid scrapes as he lifts it to add more wood. There is work to do, and you do it. You fetch cool water from the bucket. You wring out the cloth and lay it across Mary's forehead. You measure out the little medicine you have, bitter on a spoon, coaxing her to swallow. You stir the fire, pour coffee, feed the others. Life does not stop because a fever has found your house. But all the while, you keep coming back to that bed. To the girl whose golden hair you have braided 1,000 times. To the child who always tried to be good, who never wanted to trouble you. By afternoon, the pain has changed. It has moved behind her eyes. Mary presses her hands to her face, as if she could hold her head together that way. The room feels too small for her moans, too close for the way she turns away from light. You pull the curtain to dim the sun. You speak softly, but your words seem to fall through the air and shatter on the floor. "Ma, I can't," she whispers, and then stops. Her mouth works, searching for something she cannot say. The local doctor calls it brain fever, or spinal sickness. The words sound learned and heavy, but they do not really tell you what is happening. All you know is that your daughter's world is shrinking to a point of pain you cannot touch. News will move faster than you like. A small notice in a local paper will say that Miss Mary Ingalls is confined to her bed, that people fear hemorrhage of the brain, that one side of her face has gone slack and useless. But you don't read that yet. You're inside the story, not outside looking in. You see the way the left side of her face will not quite obey her, the way her smile slants. You hear the strange stillness in her voice, as if part of her has stepped away. Days blur. You move from bed to stove, from stove to well, from well to bed again. You cool her, you warm the others, you cook what you can, you clean what you must. Your hands never stop. They cannot. If your hands stop, your mind will start fitting this fever into all the empty places where fear lives. Laura watches you. You see it out of the corner of your eye, even when you pretend not to. Her dark eyes tracking every movement. The way she takes over little tasks without being asked. Fetching wood, washing cups, keeping Carrie out of the way. She's only 12, but you lean on her as if she were older because there is nobody else to lean on. You do not complain. You almost never do, not out loud. At night, with the lantern turned low, you sit by Mary's bed. The sounds of the town outside are thin and far away. The creak of a wagon, a dog's bark, a bit of laughter from the saloon. In here, there is only the rasp of Mary's breathing and the soft clink of the spoon against the cup. You talk to God then, but not with pretty words. You bargain. You demand. You whisper that he has already taken a father from you when you were a girl, taken a baby boy from you in Minnesota. You tell him that he is not having this daughter, not like this. And then slowly, the fever breaks. It does not happen all at once. One morning her skin is a little cooler. That afternoon her hands shake a little less. The terrible pain in her head eases enough that she can sleep without crying out. You let yourself breathe again. You tell yourself the worst is over. You are wrong. Because while the heat leaves her body, something else is slipping away that you can't see yet. Something you won't let yourself name until you have no choice. Mary's sight. In the weeks that follow, she begins to miss things. A cup held out to her, a chair in her path, the way the lamplight falls across the table in the evening. She reaches for things an inch to the left of where they are. You watch her eyes struggle to find your face when you speak. It starts small enough that you can pretend it is just weakness, just the tale of the sickness that will pass if you keep her fed and rested and hopeful. But the world grows dimmer for her day by day. A few months from now, a doctor in far-off Chicago will tell you the nerves of her eyes are paralyzed and there is no hope. Many years later, modern doctors will explain that this fits what they call viral meningoencephalitis, an infection that inflames brain and optic nerves until the light goes out for good. You do not have those words. All you have is your daughter's hand on your sleeve and the way her eyes, still so beautiful, look straight through you. You sit at the table one evening mending by lamplight. Laura reads aloud, her voice steady, the way you taught her. Mary's hands are folded in her lap. She tilts her head toward the sound, but her gaze no longer follows the words on the page. You pretend not to see it as long as you can, and then, one day, you can't. Laura asks Mary what colour the sunset is that night. It is a silly little question. The kind sisters ask each other for no reason at all. The sky is blazing outside, pinks and golds across the Minnesota prairie. Mary smiles. I don't know, she says quietly. I can't see it. The mending slips from your lap. There, in that small, ordinary sentence, your world turns. You feel it in your chest like a fall you did not have time to catch yourself from. The room seems to tilt. You pick up the cloth with hands that know how to work even when your heart has forgotten how to beat. You do not cry in front of them, not Laura, not Carrie, not even Charles. When the lantern has been blown out and the house is finally still, you lie awake and stare into the dark. You listen to Mary breathing in the bed she now shares with her blindness. You listen to Charles's slow, exhausted snore. You listen to your own pulse roaring in your ears. It is one thing to lose a baby before you can really know him. It is another to watch a grown daughter lose the light from her eyes while she's still here, still talking, still trying to be brave because she knows you need her to be. Your life was never easy. But from this night on, every day will be divided into two pieces. Before Mary went blind, and after. Morning does not care what happened in the dark. The next day the sun rises the same as always over Walnut Grove. Roosters crow. Someone's cow lows to be milked. A wagon rattles past on the road. The smell of damp earth and spring comes in through the chinks in the wall. You get up. You always get up. You build the fire. You grind the coffee. You set the kettle to heat. Your hands move automatically through the work they have done every morning for years. Mary dresses slowly now. You help her with the buttons she can no longer see. Your fingers are gentle, but your jaw is tight. She feels it. You know she does. You can't quite make yourself soften. Ma, I can still help, she says quietly. I can feel where things are. You pause, the fabric caught between your fingers. Of course she can. Already she's learning to map the room with her hands, to count steps, to listen for the tiny cues other people ignore. She's still Mary. She's still clever, still dutiful, still determined to carry her share of the work. but you also see what the world will see. A blind girl, a burden. You hate that word even as it forms in your mind. You hate yourself for thinking it, but you know how thin your life is stretched already, over debts and failed crops, over the baby graves you never talk about, over every move Charles has dragged you through, because he believes the next place will be the one that finally holds. You love your husband, you do. But love does not erase the ledger in your head where all the risks are written. Walnut Grove has not been kind to you. Grasshoppers ate the crops. Debts piled up. The house that was supposed to be a fresh start became another place where you learned to do without. You have buried a son. You have watched your husband's shoulders sag under disappointments he could not talk away with his fiddle. Now you look at Mary, at the milky look that has crept into her eyes, and you feel something in yourself quiver on the edge of breaking. Of course you can help, you say. Your voice comes out steady because you make it steady. We will just do things a different way now. You guide her hand to the bread dough, to the peel of a potato, to the sweep of the broom. You talk her through each movement, each small task. You watch her fingers learn textures and edges instead of shapes. Laura stands nearby, silent, taking everything in. You can almost feel her making some sort of promise deep inside herself. Later, she will call it being Mary's eyes, and she will spend years describing everything she sees to the sister who can't. But today, it is just the way she notices which chair is pushed out, which toy is underfoot, which corner of the rug might trip her blind sister. You're proud of her, you're grateful, and you're so very, very tired. At church, people murmur sympathy. They mean well. You feel their eyes on you as you sit in the pew, your hand on Mary's sleeve. You hear their whispered guesses. Scarlet fever, they say. That is the story people know. That is the disease that haunts every family on the prairie. You don't correct them. You don't have an exact name for what has taken Mary's sight, and maybe it does not matter. The fever came. Brain and spine and nerves burned. One side of her face fell helpless. The light went out slowly instead of all at once. Whatever doctors and scholars in far-off cities will call it someday, you call it loss, and loss has become too familiar. You think of your own mother, left a widow when you were 5. You think of the hard, lined faces of women you have known, each one shaped by births and burials, by winters that lasted too long, by work that never ended. You know, though you don't have the numbers, that childbed kills more women than war does men. That in some places, 1 in 100 mothers never rises from the bed where she gives life. You have escaped that particular death 5 times now. You bear the proof in the looseness of your skin, in the aches in your hips, in the way your strength runs out a little sooner than it did at 20. You also carry the grave of your baby boy inside you like a stone. You were supposed to be through the worst of it. Your last child, Grace, is already toddling. You have made it through the births, through the bleeding and the fevers and the nights when you counted your own heartbeats and waited to see if they would stop. But safety on the frontier is always an illusion. Danger just changes its face. Now, instead of fearing that you will die and leave your daughters motherless, you fear that you will live and not be enough to keep them fed, clothed, and whole. You fear that you are running out of the strength that has carried you this far. You can see the same fear, in a different shape, in Charles's eyes. He stands outside the house one evening, staring out across the fields that have betrayed him more than once. The sky is wide and pale. The soil under your feet still holds the memory of grasshopper plagues and crop failures. When he turns to you, you already know what he's going to say. "Caroline," he begins, "there's work out west. Real work. The railroad is pushing through Dakota Territory. They need a timekeeper, a paymaster. It's steady money." Dakota. The word lands heavy between you. You know what that means. A new claim, a new house. Probably not even a house at first, just a shanty or a borrowed room. New neighbours, new debts, new risks. Another move when all you have wanted for so many years is to stop moving. "Mary," you say quietly. "I know," he answers. His voice cracks just a little. "We take her. All of them. There'll be a town eventually." A school for the blind someday, further east. We can't pay for anything like that if we stay here. I can't make a living on this land anymore, Roland. His pet name for you comes out rough. I've tried. God knows I've tried. You look at him. At the man who has dragged you from Wisconsin to Kansas, back to Wisconsin, to Minnesota, to Iowa, and back again. At the man whose dreams have cost you roots, but who has also somehow kept all of you alive through grasshoppers and debt and grief. You see his shame as clearly as you see his hope. He believes, he has to believe, that this time will be different, that the railroad will pay what it promises, that the land in Dakota will be better, that he can finally do right by you all if he just keeps moving toward the horizon. You could say no. You could tell him that you will not leave Walnut Grove, that you will not drag a blind daughter and 4 other children into another unknown, that you're done staking your life on his restlessness. You open your mouth, and then you close it again. Because you know the numbers. You may not read them in ledgers, but you feel them in your bones. The money is not here. The opportunities are not here. The debt is here, and it is heavy. Somewhere out on that prairie, there is a railroad that needs paying and timing and men who will be grateful for their wages. Somewhere out there is a piece of land the government will let you homestead if you can just stay alive on it long enough. You have daughters who will need dowries or at least shoes. A blind girl who will need schooling in a world that does not yet know what to do with her. So you swallow your fear. You nod once. Then go, you say quietly. Find the work. We will follow when you're settled. The words taste like betrayal of yourself, but they are also, in their own hard way, an act of love. You tell yourself that this time it will be for the last time. You tell yourself that Dakota will be a place to stop, not just another place to pass through. You have no idea yet how close that move will come to breaking you. June comes, and with it, departure. Charles leaves first. He kisses each girl's forehead in turn, Grace reaching for his beard, Carrie clinging, Laura standing stiff and straight, Mary lifting her face but not quite meeting his gaze. He holds you a little longer. His hands broad and warm on your back. I'll send for you as soon as I can, he says. You nod against his shoulder. You have heard that promise before, but you also know he means it each time. When he is gone, the house feels like a coat that no longer fits. You move through its rooms, packing what you can, letting go of what you must. Cloth you've mended too many times to mend again. Dishes too chipped to survive another wagon ride. Little scraps of comfort that never belonged to you entirely in the first place. You sell what you can to pay what you owe. You watch familiar faces go by in the street outside. Neighbours you will probably never see again. You listen to them talk about crops, about weather, about the latest news from back east. For them, this is still home. For you, it is already becoming a memory. When the letter comes from Dakota, your hands shake just a little as you open it. There is not much on the page. Charles is not a man for spilling words, but you can hear his excitement in the neat, careful scrawl. The railroad has kept its word. He has work as timekeeper and paymaster with the Chicago and Northwestern's division, pushing west from Tracy, Minnesota, toward a place they are already calling the Dakota Boom. There is a small camp by a slough called Silver Lake, where grading crews and surveyors are working. There is a railroad-built house, the surveyor's house, that the company will not need over winter. If you come, he writes, the railroad will let you use it. A roof, 4 walls, a man's wages in cash. A chance to be in place when the government opens land for claims along the new line. You fold the letter carefully. You sit at the table a long time, then you begin to pack in earnest. You choose what can fit in trunks and boxes that must ride a train instead of a wagon this time. The good dishes, the precious little china shepherdess, the quilts you have pieced from old dresses and flour sacks, the few books you own, including the Bible that has carried you this far. You pack with Mary in mind now. You tie up bundles so she can find them by touch. You talk her through the order of things so that when you reach the end of the track she will not be completely lost. You will hear the train before you feel it, you tell her as you fold linens. It's a terrible noise, but you must not be afraid. You will sit beside Laura. You will hold on to the seat. I will be right there. I'm not afraid, Ma, she says. There is a steadiness in her that humbles you. Inside, you're terrified enough for both of you. The day you leave Walnut Grove, the town looks almost kind. The little church, the familiar faces at the depot, the shape of the river in the distance. You stand on the platform with your girls and feel the weight of all you're carrying that does not fit in any trunk. The years, the memories, the graves. "You'll write?" someone says. You nod. You both know letters are slow, and the prairie is wide and life is busy. But saying you will write is a way of saying goodbye without saying the lastness of it. The train whistle slices through your thoughts. Iron wheels squeal. Steam hisses. The engine looms black and massive, more machine than anything you have ever touched before. It smells of coal smoke and hot metal. The sound fills your chest and makes Grace cry. You gather her up. You gather them all up as much as one woman can. Hands on shoulders, names in your mouth, you urge them up the steps and into the car. Inside, the air is close with the smell of too many bodies and too little fresh air. The seats are worn wood. The windows rattle in their frames. Voices rise and fall around you. German, Swedish, English like yours and not like yours, all braided together by the same hope, that somewhere up the line life will be better. You settle Mary next to Laura. "Hold on," you remind her softly, though the train has not yet moved. When it does, when the great shudder runs through the car and the landscape begins to slip backwards past the windows, you feel something inside you slip too. The land of Walnut Grove, with all its failures and small joys, begins to peel away. Fields, creek, horizon. You keep your eyes on your daughters instead. "Tell me what you see," Mary says to Laura. Laura leans into the window and starts to talk. About fields rolling by, about little stations, about a lone tree on the prairie and the way the light sluices over it. She talks and talks, learning the work she'll do for years, turning a world of colour and shape into words that her sister can carry. You listen. You think of the land you're heading into. Dakota Territory, still officially a territory, not yet a state. Thinly settled along the new rail line. Homestead land open on the books, if you can pay the $16 filing fee and survive 5 years on 160 acres of wind and weather and loneliness. You think of the women already out there, scattered across the grass like dropped buttons, giving birth with no doctor within 50 miles, facing winters that kill with cold and summers that kill with heat, dying in childbirth at rates that would make city folk shudder if city folk thought about such things at all. You're going to join them. The train carries you west, each mile a stitch, sewing you deeper into a cloth you did not weave but must now live inside. You do not know yet about the muskrat house that will warn of the coming winter, about the old native man who will speak of cycles and blizzards, about twisted hay and coffee grinder wheat and a railroad that will abandon your little town under 30 feet of snow. All you know is that your eldest daughter cannot see, your husband is waiting at the end of this line, and you have chosen, once again, to step into the unknown because standing still was its own kind of death. You tighten your arms around Grace as the train rattles on. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to pretend you can already feel the boards of the surveyor's house under your feet, the Dakota wind at your back. You open them again when Mary's hand finds your sleeve. "Ma," she whispers, "are we almost there?" "Not yet," you say. You have no idea just how long almost will turn out to be. The train has been running for hours when the rhythm of the wheels begins to change underneath your feet. All that long afternoon you have listened to the steady clatter over rails laid weeks and months before, iron lines stretching back toward Minnesota and all the life you have left behind. Now, as the sun drops lower, the sound grows rougher, more uneven. Sometimes the car jolts hard enough that Mary's hand tightens on your sleeve and Carrie's head comes up from your lap, eyes wide. You know what that means. Somewhere ahead, the finished railroad thins out into work still in progress. The crew that hired Charles has been pushing west mile by mile, and this train is following close on their heels. You feel it in your bones. You're rolling toward the very edge of the known world. Mary sits close beside you, her sightless gaze turned toward the window as if she can still see the prairie running by. You tell her what is there. The last scattered groves of trees, the wide, low sky, the pale grass rippling in waves. You do it for her, but also for yourself. Turning the strange into words makes it feel a little less frightening. At your feet, Grace fusses and then dozes, heavy in your arms. Carrie leans against your shoulder and whispers a question you have no real answer for. May. How much farther? Not so far now, you tell her quietly. We're going to where your pa is. He'll be there when the train stops. You say it as calmly as you can, though you yourself have never seen this place. All you have are Charles's letters. Talk of the Chicago and Northwestern pushing its line west, of wages paid in cash instead of promises, of a camp somewhere near a little body of water called Silver Lake. Talk of opportunity, talk of one more beginning. You know his pattern as well as you know the inside of your own hands, but you also know there is no going back. Outside, the last small towns have disappeared. No more depots with painted signs, no more neat streets laid out along Main. Now, when the train slows for a moment, you glimpse only piles of ties, heaps of gravel, the raw cuts where earth has been gouged out for the right of way. Men move like dark ants in the distance, swinging picks, driving stakes, shifting the land to match the railroad's plans. The car gives a long, shuddering lurch. The whistle screams once, twice, and the brakeman's voice calls down the aisle. End of the track, this is as far as she goes. You feel the brakes bite, hear iron scrape and groan, and then the train finally sighs to a stop. For a long breath, no one moves. Then the car cracks open with cold wind and noise, and your new life rushes in. The end of the track. You gather the girls and your bundle of belongings in a practiced motion. However many times your life has already been broken apart and packed into boxes, it never really gets easier, only more efficient. The platform here is hardly a platform at all. Bare planks, piled lumber, a short, rough stretch of boards that ends in open air. Beyond it, the line of rails simply stops, as if someone laid down a string and then ran out of thread. Past that dead end, nothing but prairie and sky and the faint blue shadow of a slough in the distance. The air has that dry, sharp smell of worked earth and cold iron. Men's voices carry on it, mixed with the ring of hammers on spikes, the rasp of saws, the clatter of tools being thrown into wagons for the night. This is not a town. It is a pause in the railroad's motion, a campsite of the company's will. And then you see him. Charles is waiting just beyond the last car, hat tipped back, hair blown by the Dakota wind. For a heartbeat, he is the young man you married, eyes bright, alive with some new idea he can hardly keep inside. Then you see the lines at the corners of his mouth, the worry etched in his forehead, and the way he looks first, not at you, but at Mary. He comes striding toward you, long legs taking the distance in a few steps. Caroline. His arms go around you, and the girls at once, his coat smelling of sweat and coal smoke and prairie dust. For a moment you let yourself lean into that embrace. Whatever has come before, whatever will come after, he is here, and you are together. That has always been enough to pull you on to the next place. When he pulls back, his hand goes straight to Mary's shoulder. "How are you, girl?" "I'm well, Pa," she says, tilting her face toward the sound of his voice. "I'm glad to be here." He glances at you over her head, and in that look is all the unspoken grief of the last months. The long illness, the helplessness, the slow extinguishing of your eldest daughter's sight. None of that changes just because the train has stopped. You will carry it with you into whatever house you live in next. But for now, there is work to do. Charles takes up the heaviest bundle without asking. "We've not far to go. The company put up a house near the lake for the section boss when there's a proper town and regular trains. They've let us use it through the winter." "A company house?" you ask quietly, falling into step beside him as the girls trail behind, stumbling a little over the rutted ground. He nods. Dry roof, tight walls, and it's full up with supplies. Flour, canned goods, tools. They didn't want to haul it all back east for the winter, so they've stacked it in there. We'll be minding it for them till spring. You say nothing for a moment, turning that over slowly. A winter in a house you did not have to build from the frozen ground. Shelves already lined, barrels already filled. After the years of dugouts and half-finished cabins and meals stretched past reason, the thought feels almost indecent. "It's bigger than anything we've lived in," he adds, pride warming his voice. "Laura will tell you. She'll say it's the biggest house in the world." Laura, walking just behind you, flushes a little, as if she's been caught thinking exactly that. To a girl used to one-room cabins and sod roofs, even an ordinary frame house looks like a mansion. You crest a slight rise and see it at last. On the low ground near the water's edge stands a square, plain, clapboarded building. No ornament, no paint. 2 rooms side by side with a small lean-to jutting off the back. It looks stark against the endless grass, like something sketched on bare paper. Beyond it, Silver Lake lies still and dark, its surface dull under the late afternoon sky. There are no other houses, no church steeple, no schoolhouse, no row of shops. Only the house, the lake, and the faint threads of wagon tracks leading nowhere. This, Charles has told you, is where a town will be. Standing there with the wind tugging at your skirts and the children pressing close against your side, it is hard to imagine. But you have seen other empty places fill before. First one roof, then another, then the slow weaving of paths and habits until people begin to call it home. For now, though, you're here on the last bit of finished track, at the edge of a world that exists only on surveyors' maps and railroad company plans, and the winter is coming, the empty house by the water. Inside, the house smells of a new lumber and cold iron. The front room is long and bare, with a board floor and an unpainted ceiling. Bunks line one wall, shelves another. Wooden crates are stacked neatly in the corners, stenciled with the railroad's initials and numbers that mean more to the company clerks than they do to you. In the back room, a stove squats like a black iron animal, pipe thrust through the roof. A narrow pantry runs along one side, and when you open its door, your breath catches. Flour in tight white sacks, sugar, coffee, canned peaches in rows, glass shining faintly even in the afternoon light, salt pork, beans, kegs of nails, coils of rope, tools hung in their places. It is not yours, not really. All of it belongs to the railroad company, as surely as the rails outside and the men who swing the hammers. You are only its caretakers, but for this winter at least it will keep your family from hunger. You can feel the tight place in your chest loosen a little. The girls move through the house, their footsteps hollow on the boards. Laura's fingers trail along the smooth window frame, the edge of a bunk, the cold iron of a saw hung out of reach. Carrie darts from room to room, counting under her breath. "It's so big, Ma," Laura says softly, almost apologetic, as if she has no right to be pleased. You smooth the hair back from her forehead. "Oh, it will be work to keep it clean," you answer, because that is safer than admitting how relieved you are. But yes, it is a good house. Mary stands very still near the centre of the room, hands lightly touching the back of a chair. You can see her listening, mapping the space in her mind the way she cannot with her eyes. You take her hand and walk her slowly around the rooms, counting steps aloud, letting her fingers find door frames, the stove's solid curve, the edge of the bunk where she and Laura will sleep. "This is the table," you tell her. "The stove is 3 steps from here. The door to the pantry is at your right hand." She nods, fixing each detail in that new dark world inside her head. You watch her, the way she squares her shoulders, the way she refuses to let her mouth tremble. Whatever comes this winter, there will be no running away from it. She knows that as surely as you do. Outside, the sun slips lower, staining the lake with dull copper and then fading. The men from the camp drift away to their own shanties and tents, the sounds of their talk and laughter growing faint and then swallowed by the open land. By the time you have made the beds, unpacked what little you have brought, and set a simple supper of bread and pork and hot coffee, the world beyond the windows is nothing but darkness and wind. The railroad camp has its own life, but you are at the edge of it. You can hear rough laughter from some distant shack, the sharp music of a mouth harp, the occasional shout. You know what such places can hold after dark. Too much drink, too little restraint, men who have been away from their own families too long. You check the door twice, sliding the bar firmly into place. Charles sets his rifle within easy reach of the bed. You have done this before in other isolated houses, But there is a different quality to the silence here. In Minnesota, there had been neighbours just over the rise, other women's lamplight shining faintly through the trees. Here, there is only the sleeping lake and the black line of the unfinished track. Yet when you blow out the lamp and lie down with Grace's small, warm body curved into the hollow of your own, you find that you can breathe more easily than you have in months. The house does not shake in the wind as your dugouts did. No dust sifts constantly from the ceiling. There is food stacked behind those pantry walls enough to see you through the snow, if you're careful. For the first time in a long while, you're not lying awake wondering if there will be flour left in the barrel tomorrow. Morning comes with a white rim of frost on the windows and a wind that goes straight through your shawl when you step outside to pour out the dishwater. The lake is rimmed with ice at the edges, thin and clear as glass. A few ducks startle up when you come near, wings thumping the cold air. By the time the first real snow settles over the prairie, you have made the surveyor's house into a home. You know just how the light falls through the windows at midday, and where to put the table so that Mary can feel the warmth on her face while she sews by touch. You have spread your one good tablecloth, set your small piece of china where you can see it, stitched curtains from the calico you managed to keep. These are small things, but they are a kind of fence against the emptiness outside. Charles goes out each day to the railroad's work, keeping the accounts for the grading crews, checking time, walking the line with the section boss. The pay is steady, even when the weather drives the men into their bunkhouses for days at a stretch. It is not the kind of work he loves. There is no soil turning under his hands, no crops springing up in answer to his labour. But for the first time in a long while, the money he earns does not depend on whether locusts fall from the sky or rain comes when it should. You feel the difference in the way you sleep at night. When the crews finally pull back for the winter, taking their tents and wagons and leaving the rails jutting into the frozen distance, the camp shrinks in on itself. A few men remain to watch over the company property. A few others, like your sister-in-law's husband, stay on in rough cabins with the idea of filing nearby claims come spring. The surveyor's house, though, belongs now almost entirely to you. The company's tools and supplies sit neatly in their places, the pantry still half full. Beyond your walls, the prairie opens in every direction, flat and snowbound under a wide, pale sky. There is a kind of terrible beauty in it, clean and empty and honest. The nights grow longer. You move through them by the steady rhythm of work. Bread to bake, clothes to mend, water to haul from the ice-choked edge of the lake, hay to twist into tight sticks that burn quick and hot in the stove. Children to keep fed and occupied, and as much as you can manage, off from dwelling too long on the vastness pressing against your windows. Mary learns, day by patient day, how to navigate the rooms without sight. You watch her fingers grow surer as they slide along the backs of chairs, find the edge of the doorframe at just the right moment, lift a cup from the table and set it down again without spilling. She folds towels, peels potatoes by feel, measures flour by weight in her hands. Sometimes, when the other girls are busy, you catch her sitting very still by the window, head tipped as if listening to something only she can hear. You know better than to disturb her then. Whatever sorrow she has, she must find her own way to carry it. All you can do is make sure there is always some small task ready for her hands. Laura, restless and bright, takes quickly to the new routines. She helps twist hay, or hauls wood, runs messages when a rider from some outlying shanty comes to the house with news. She has always had an eye for the smallest details of the world. Now she becomes the bridge between what she sees and what Mary cannot. "Tell me how the snow looks today," Mary will ask, and Laura will oblige, describing the way it lies in soft waves, where the wind has let it rest, or in sharp ridges where it has been driven off the bare ground. You listen as you work, grateful for the sound of their voices. Words you have learned are another kind of fuel in a winter like this one. Some evenings, when the chores are done and the lamp burns low, Charles takes down his fiddle. The notes are thin in the cold air, but they thread through the rooms, wrapping around you all. For a few minutes at least, the world shrinks to the small circle of light and the sound of his bow on the strings. You do not speak much then. There is too much that cannot be said without breaking something you are afraid might never mend. Instead, you let the music say it for you. The weariness, the hope, the stubborn thread of belief that this time, this place might hold. A camp becomes a town. Winter eases its grip almost reluctantly. One morning, you wake to the sound of water running. Not in the basin by the stove, not in the kettle, but out beyond the walls. The ice along the lake's edge has turned grey and rotten. The snow that once lay smooth over everything now breaks apart in dirty heaps, streaked with the dark earth beneath. The girls stand at the window, pressing their hands to the cold glass, watching rivulets carve paths down the slight slopes toward the slough. The light itself feels different, stronger, higher, with a promise in it that you have lived long enough not to trust entirely, but cannot help answering anyway. With the thaw comes people. At first they arrive in 2s and 3s, their wagons groaning under loads of rough lumber, barrels, household goods lashed down under canvas. They follow the thin tracks of the railroad grade, come over the low rise, and pull up uncertainly, taking in the house, the lake, the line of rails running like a scar across the land. Charles goes out to meet them, hat in hand, words ready. He has always been good with words. Too good, you sometimes think. But here that gift has weight. These men and women want to know about the soil, the water, the wind, about how deep the snow lay, how the drifts piled, how a family fared through the winter out here alone. You watch from the door as he tells the story in his own way. He does not lie, exactly, but he leans into the good parts. The fine, rich sod waiting just under the surface, the way the lake shines in summer, the fact that you did not starve, that the children are all still here with you. He mentions the company house as proof that the railroad means to make this place permanent. Some of them move on, farther out into the open prairie, chasing the thought of a land of their own not yet claimed. Others stay. Before long, 2 or 3 tents and shanties have sprung up along the higher ground near where the depot is promised. A line of stakes appears, marking off streets and lots with names that feel almost too grand for the bare, muddy tracks between them. Dismet. You taste the unfamiliar syllables slowly. The name belongs to a missionary you have never met, a man who walked these plains long before rails and stakes and wagons, speaking to people who have already been pushed away by the time you arrive. The land remembers them in ways the new maps do not. Still, the town is here now, whether you feel ready for it or not. Men from a land company come with rolled-up papers and brass chains, swinging their instruments in careful arcs, calling out numbers and directions that Charles writes down in his neat hand. They drive in stakes at measured intervals, laying out lots and alleys and a main street with a clear view of where the tracks will soon cross. One day, he comes in from helping them, cheeks whipped red by the wind, eyes bright with that same dangerous hope you have seen so many times. "Carrie," he calls, "come see where our town is going to stand. Right here, where you've been playing all winter. Why, it will be the county seat yet, you wait and see." Carrie runs out, skirt hems muddy, hair streaming. Laura follows more slowly, torn as always between childish excitement and the wary understanding she has begun to acquire. Mary listens from the doorway as you guide her to a chair, her hands clasped in her lap. "Pa says they've marked off the lots," Laura reports, coming back to the house later with her shoes caked in drying mud. "There's even a place for a school." The word pricks at your heart in a familiar way. A school. A place where your younger girls can sit at proper desks, learn their letters and figures instead of snatching lessons between chores. A place Mary will never see inside, or except through the words that others bring her. There is another thought behind it, sharper. If there is to be a settled town here, with a school and a church and neighbours close enough to hear if you call in the night, perhaps the wandering is over at last. You do not say it aloud. You have learned over the years to be careful what hopes you name. A letter goes out from this almost town, written in Charles's hand and carried eastward along the rails as soon as the first trains can reach Tracy again. In it he describes this place the way the railroad men would like to hear it described. As fine a country as a man could wish, with good land still to be had, and room for stock and crops and all the improvements that follow a line of iron. He signs it with his initials. Either the ink blotted a little at the end where his hand shook with cold or hurry, or a feeling you know too well to misread. This urgent need to believe that he has finally brought you all to the right place. Not long after, on a sharp, bright day in February, he hitches up the team and sets off toward the nearest land office. You're filing then, you say, as you help him wrap the extra scarf around his neck, your fingers lingering for a second longer than they need to. I am, he answers. A quarter section just north and west. There's good water. We'll build a shanty first thing when the ground's clear. It's time, Caroline. Time we had land of our own again. He has said those words before, in other years, in other places. Each time they have pulled you away from whatever small stability you had found. And yet this time, standing in the doorway of a house you do not own, watching him drive away toward a claim he cannot yet even fence, something in you stirs that has been still for a long while. You picture a low, rough house rising out of the sod, your own beds and tables arranged where you choose, fields stretching away in neat, dark furrows under a sky that, for once, might look down on you year after year from the same place. Behind you the girls talk in quick, bright voices about the homestead, about the garden you will plant, the calves and chicks you will raise, the way the winds will sound coming over land that is not just borrowed, but promised. Mary smiles, turning her face toward the voices as if she can see every bit as clearly as they do. You will have to tell me how it looks, she says. All of it. You promise that you will. For now, though, you turn back into the surveyor's house and begin the slow work of closing one more season of your life. You pack what little you own back into boxes and bundles. You clean the company's shelves and scrub the company's floors until they look almost as they did the day you arrived. You make an inventory of what is left in the pantry and stack it neatly, ready for the men who will unlock this door next winter and see nothing but a well-kept storehouse. They will not see the nights the wind shook these walls, the mornings you stood at the frozen edge of the lake with a bucket in your hand and a baby crying inside the house. They will not see how Mary learned the corners of these rooms by touch, how Laura watched the line of the track extend a little farther each week, how Carrie counted the days until the snow melted enough for her to run outside again. They will not see you standing in the doorway at dusk, apron still on, watching the faint beginnings of a town sketch itself around you, in the thin smoke of new chimneys and the sound of hammers on green wood. That is all right. The prairie keeps its own record. Soon enough, you will step out of this house and walk toward the new claim, leading your daughters along a faint wagon track through the grass. The surveyor's house will shrink behind you, no longer a home but a landmark in a story that is still changing shape. You know, though you do not yet have the words for it, that what waits ahead is not only hope and harvest and neighbourly comfort. There will be another winter, longer and harder than any you have yet known. And there will be days when the wind erases the world, and nights when the pantry shelves stand nearly bare. For tonight, you do not borrow that trouble. Tonight, you sit at the table in the house by Silver Lake, your family gathered close, the lamp burning low, and listen to the last of the ice breaking up along the shore. You lay your tired hands flat on the clean, worn boards and feel, for just a moment, the steadying weight of the life you have held together through sickness and hunger and miles of empty road. Outside, under a sky as wide as any ocean, the end of the track waits to become the centre of a town. Inside, you breathe in, breathe out, and let yourself believe, just a little, that this time perhaps you have ridden far enough. By the time the ice along Silver Lake has sunk into grey slush and the wagon ruts have reappeared in the thawing ground, the surveyor's house no longer feels like a refuge. It feels like a question. You have been here long enough to know every board, every knot in the floor, every place where the wind slips in no matter how tightly you stuff the cracks. You know how the light falls through the windows at noon, and how the sound of the railroad carries differently across the frozen lake than it does over open water. Now, as the days lengthen and the mud sucks at your shoes, there is one more thing you know. You cannot stay. The railroad men have come back in force, swarming along the line like ants, bringing with them the noise and urgency of a world that is moving on. The house you have been borrowing, this square wooden box on the edge of the water, is company property again. Soon it will be a section house for track crews, or a depot storehouse, or whatever else the Chicago and Northwestern decides. It was never meant to be yours. What will be yours, if you can hold it, lies a mile or two out on the open prairie, where Charles has driven his stakes into the sod and signed his name in the land office ledger. Northeast Quarter, Section 3, Township 110 North, Range 56 West. 157 and a fraction acres of wind and grass and promise. He comes back from Brookings with the filing papers folded carefully in his pocket, the ink hardly dry, and lays them on the table as if they were a newborn child. "It's ours now, Caroline," he says. "Yours for as long as we can make it so." You think of all the other places that were ours once. Wisconsin timber, Kansas prairie, Minnesota creek bottom. All of them left behind when crops failed, or laws changed, or hope wore too thin. Paper does not keep the wind off a house or put food in a child's mouth. But here, in this moment, you let him have his triumph. You smooth the folded sheet with your fingertips, tracing the cramped clerk's hand. The filing fee, $16, is more money than you have seen in one place for a long time. It is, for Charles, the price of starting over yet again. For you, it is the cost of admitting there is nowhere left to go if this doesn't work. "We'd best see what kind of house we can make on it," you say at last. "Es ist Kirstiam." Breaking ground on a last chance. The day you leave the surveyor's house for the claim, the sky's clean and high, washed blue by weeks of melting snow. The lake lies open now, cold and flat. The ice gone except for a few grey stubborn slabs rotting along the far shore. You load the wagon in practised silence, feather ticks and kettles. The chipped china ma insists on wrapping in cloth and carrying herself, the few pieces of furniture that are truly yours, not the company's. Barrels that once seemed like luxury when they stood in the surveyor's pantry. Flour, beans, salt pork, now rattling lighter than you would like. Mary stands by the wagon wheel, fingers resting lightly on the spoke, feeling for each small shift in balance as another piece of your life is hoisted up. She listens intently as you and Laura talk over what goes where, building the new house first in words. Laura is everywhere at once, checking the harness, tying down bundles, running back inside for the one thing you have almost forgotten. She's still enough of a child to feel a spark of adventure in the move, still enough of an adult to be ashamed of that spark when she sees how tired you are. When at last everything is loaded, you turn once more to look at the surveyor's house. The windows stare back blankly. In a few months someone else will unlock that door and see only neatly stacked tools and crates, not the nights you lay awake counting what food remained, not the afternoons you taught Mary to walk this space without sight. Then you climb into the wagon and let Charles drive you out into the empty land. The claim shanty is hardly more than a suggestion when you arrive, a rectangle of bare foundation stones, a pile of boards. The outline Charles has built in his head does not yet exist in wood and nail. "It'll be snug enough," he says, standing in the middle of nothing and seeing walls. 14 by 20 for now, we can add on when we're able. You can already feel the wind shouldering at those imaginary boards, but you nod and take the baby while he and Laura begin to unload. In the days that follow, the house rises in stages. Floor joists first, then the plank floor itself, a luxury after dugouts and dirt. Then the walls, thin studs and wider boards, nailed tight as hands can make them. No plaster, no insulation, only wood between you and whatever the Dakota sky decides to send. You stuff rags in the largest cracks, save every scrap that might someday be a curtain or a quilt. You know this kind of house. You have lived in its cousins in other states. It will be draughty and cramped and always a little damp at the corners, but it will be yours, and no company man will come one day to say you must leave. At night, as you lie on the ticking in your new home and listen to the wind push and pull at the walls, you try the words in your mind like a prayer. This is the last move. Whether you believe it or not is beside the point. There is nowhere further west you are willing to chase after a dream. A summer that pretends to be kind. Once the shanty is up and the beds are in place, the work changes its shape but not its weight. By day, the prairie around you is a construction site. Not of boards and nails, but of furrows and fence posts. Charles hitches the team and breaks the sod, the plough's blade biting into earth that has never known such an insult. Long strips of turf roll up and fall aside, their tangled roots still clinging to each other, their smell rich and damp and strange. He sweats and curses and coaxes the plough through, while Laura follows behind, breaking the tough slices into smaller pieces for a future sod wall, or picking stones from the new-turned field. You and the younger girls make a garden in whatever patch of ground is soft enough to take a hoe. Potatoes, onions, a few precious seeds saved from better years. You know how quickly a harvest can vanish under insects or hail. Still, you press each seed into the soil as if this time might be different. Mary moves through this new world with slow, as deliberate steps. The shanty is smaller than the surveyor's house, its corners closer together, its dangers easier to map. She learns the count of steps from bed to door, from table to stove, from threshold to the flat rock outside where she can sit with her face turned to the sun and listen to the wind in the grass. Laura becomes her guide beyond the walls. They walk together along the edge of the big slough, Laura describing the way the cattails tremble, the way the frogs' voices overlap in the evenings like rough music. She tells Mary how the new town of De Smet looks from a distance now, a scatter of crude buildings along the tracks, each one throwing up smoke that hangs low in the still warm air. The air is too warm, too calm, for a place that carries winter so deep in its bones. But no one says that out loud. Men come and go along the road between the claims and the new town, hauling lumber, arguing over whose line of stakes is an inch this way or that. Land agents from the railroad's townsite company stride about with their ledgers, drawing the future on paper while the present is still all mud and improvisation. Some days, Charles walks into De Smet to help in a small building that will soon be his store and, above it, for a time, your winter home. Other days he stays with the plough until darkness makes the furrows disappear. There is always more to do than daylight to do it in, yet under the fatigue there is a thin, surprising thread of something like relief. For the first time in years, you are not packing to leave or waiting for someone else to tell you to go. There is no landlord's patience to run out, no eastern bank to call in a loan on land you can no longer coax a harvest from. The claim may yet defeat you. You are too experienced to pretend otherwise, but if you fail here, it will not be because someone changed their mind about whether you belong. On Sundays, when the weather allows, neighbours gather in the largest half-built house, or in the school tent that springs up near the new main street. The talk is all of crops and wells and the price of lumber. The talk is also of how this town will grow, how someday there will be proper sidewalks and shade trees, and perhaps even a brick schoolhouse. You have heard such talk in other places, you have watched it wither, but sitting there with Grace asleep against your shoulder and Mary's hand lightly resting on your arm, so you let yourself imagine a future where your daughters live in one place long enough to recognise the sound of every footstep on the street. Summer stretches itself across the prairie, long and golden and deceptive. The grass is high, the slough full, the sky a vast hard blue. In the evenings when the work is done and Charles takes down his fiddle, the air through the open shanty door is soft and mild. If you did not know better, you might think the land was apologising for all it has taken from you before. The animals know first. It is August when the first crack appears in that gentle picture. The haying is in full swing by then. Day after day, Charles and Laura work out in the heat, cutting and stacking the tall grass that will be the only barrier between your cattle and starvation when the snow lies deep. On one such afternoon, when the light is thick and the air almost too still, they follow the edge of the big slough farther than they usually go, looking for a patch of grass thick enough to be worth the effort. The ground underfoot is treacherous here, half solid, half quivering, the sort of place that can swallow a careless step. That is when they see it. Half hidden among the reeds, rising from the water like some low, domed island, is a muskrat house. You have all seen such houses before, lumpy heaps of mud and grass where the animals ride out the cold, but this one is different. Its walls are thick. thicker than any Charles has seen in the years he has walked marsh edges and trap lines. The outer layer of mud is packed hard, the nest itself buried deep inside a fortress of frozen earth waiting to happen. Laura stops, the scythe on her shoulder, and calls him over. "Pa, look how they've built it up." He studies it a long time, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. Out here, with no other human mark in sight, the work of animals carries its own kind of authority. "They don't waste labour," he says at last. "Not for nothing. They know something we don't." He straightens, squinting at the flat, innocent sky. The sun is as hot as any August sun has ever been. The grass around them is buzzed over by insects, alive and humming. "We're going to have a hard winter," he says quietly. "Harder than we've seen." When he tells you about it that night, lying sitting by the lamplight while Mary's needle moves in and out of her sewing by touch, you feel the familiar tightening beneath your breastbone. You have lived your whole life at the mercy of the winters that did not match their beginnings. "Then we'll put up more hay," you answer, "because there is very little else you can do. We'll be ready." But no matter how many stacks rise around the homestead, no matter how carefully you count jars and sacks in the shanty's corner, you cannot shake the image of that muskrat house, buried safe in the cold, waiting out a season that hasn't yet arrived. The sky stays bright. The days stay long. The claim shanty bakes in the sun until you're grateful for even the faintest breeze that sneaks under the eaves. The warning settles into the back of your mind like a splinter. The old man's warning. By early October, the world pretends it has forgotten the muskrats. The days are still strangely warm. The grass, instead of drying into brittle brown, clings to a tired, dusty green. There is a softness to the air that feels more like late September in Minnesota than like the brink of a Dakota winter. Men in town joke that it will be an easy year. They say the old-timers, what few there are in a place as new as this, have been wrong before. They say there is still time to bring in another load of lumber, to put off digging that second well, to leave the last of the potatoes in the ground a week or two longer. One afternoon, while Charles is in De Smet on errands for the store and the shanty, an old native man walks into Fuller's building where the men are gathered. His hair is braided with grey, his clothes worn but neat. He stands in the doorway and waits until the talk dies down enough for his voice to be heard. Some of the men shift uncomfortably at his presence. Others stare in the blunt way of people who forget that the place they call new is older than their grandparents in other languages. Through the open door, Charles listens as the old man speaks in halting English, punctuated by words from a tongue most of the settlers have never tried to learn. He talks of winters, of cycles of 7 years and then 3 times 7. He points, not at the tidy calendar nailed behind the counter, but out toward the prairie, where the sky's already beginning to change colour with the coming evening. 3 sevens, he says, hard winter, many snows, many winds, no trains. Somebody snorts. Somebody else mutters a joke about Injun stories. A few men glance uneasily at one another and then look away, not wanting to be seen taking the warning seriously. The old man's face does not change. He has seen more winters than any of these settlers have seen planting seasons. He repeats his words once calmly, then turns and walks back out into the sun. That night, at the shanty table, Charles tells you about him. They laughed, he says, slicing his share of salt pork a little thinner than he might have earlier in the summer. But he meant what he said. He's seen more of this land than we have. And the muskrats. You do not need him to finish the sentence. The muskrats have already said their piece. You look around the cramped little room, at Mary's composed profile, at Laura's restless eyes, at Carrie's thin shoulders, ye at Grace drowsing against your skirt. You think of the hay in its neat stacks, the potatoes in their pit, the flour in its sack. You think of how far it is from here to anywhere that might have help to spare if the old man is right. We'll do what we can, you say, and we'll pray he's wrong. Outside, the air is still unnervingly mild. The sky's full of stars. There is no hint yet of what is already on its way. October 15th, 1880. The day the first blizzard comes, it begins like any other work day. You wake to a greyness at the windows that seems like nothing more than a high, thin overcast. The wind is from the south, carrying a faint damp edge, as if rain might be thinking about it. The air is cool, but not cold enough to make you hurry. Charles eats quickly and goes out to see to the stock. There is still fencing he wants to finish before real winter. Still a few loads of hay he means to haul close to the barn. Laura pulls on her shoes and follows, coatless, because the morning doesn't seem to demand more. By mid-morning, though, the wind has swung. It comes now from the northwest, harder, with a new knife-like bite that slides under your shawl even when you stand close to the stove. Clouds that were once a thin veil have thickened into something heavier, darker, massing low over the open land. You open the door to shake a rug and the air grabs it out of your hands and flings fine grit of something into your face. Not quite rain, not yet snow, but icy enough to make your eyes water. "Laura," you call, sharper than you mean to. "Get in here and bring your pa with you." They come in with their cheeks reddened and their hair whipped wild, surprised at how fast the morning has turned. Behind them, the light is dimming in a way that has nothing to do with the hour. "It's coming down the line," Charles says, closing the door against a gust that rattles the whole shanty. I could see it from the rise, like a wall. You've seen storms sweep across prairie before, dark curtains marching toward you across miles of grass. Usually there is time to finish a chore, to pull in the wash, to brace yourself. Not this one. The rain turns to sleet so quickly you barely have time to wonder when it changed. Then, in what feels like a single breath between one heartbeat and the next, the sleet becomes snow. Not gentle flakes, but hard, and these driven grains that sting when they hit exposed skin. The wind howls, not whistles, not moans, but roars, as if some vast beast has found its voice at last. Snow comes at the shanty from every direction, whirling, stabbing, determined to find any crack it can force its way through. Within an hour, the world beyond the single small window is erased. There is only a white, seething blur pressed up against the glass and the sound of the wind hammering at the walls. Snow snakes under the door and piles along the floorboards until you sweep it back and stuff more rags into the widening gap. The stovepipe hums with the force of air trying to tear it free. Mary sits on the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap, head tilted to listen. She cannot see the sudden vanishing of the world outside, but she can hear it in every board. Her face is composed, but the tendons in her neck stand out like cords. Carrie huddles close to you, Grace whimpering whenever the house gives a particularly hard shudder. Laura moves restlessly from window to door to stove, soot on her hands from feeding the fire, looking for something to do that will make the storm less personal. There is nothing to do but wait. By evening, the shanty feels smaller than it has ever felt. The lamp's circle of light is tight and trembling. Snow has banked itself so high against the outer walls that when Charles opens the door a crack to look out, only a packed white face of drift stares back at him. "Well," he says quietly, shutting it again, "the stock will have to fend for themselves tonight. I can't even see the barn, let alone reach it." You lie down that night fully dressed. Boots by the bed in case something gives way and you have to move quickly. The wind continues its assault, buffeting and shrieking as if intent on peeling the boards from the frame one by one. You think, not for the first time, of the old man in the store and of the muskrat house sunk deep in the big slough. They knew. When the train does not come. The storm lasts 3 days. When it finally blows itself out, it leaves behind a landscape you would not have recognized if you'd been dropped into it without warning. The familiar shapes of your little world, the barn, the haystacks, the low-rise toward town, are all altered, buried, or erased. Drifts lie like frozen waves, cresting higher than Charles's head. In places they have filled in low spots entirely, making the ground look flatter than it is, hiding treacherous hollows under deceptively smooth surfaces. The air, once the snow stops moving, is a brittle, cutting cold. The sky is painfully clear, every edge sharpened by the light. It takes half a day just to dig a path from the shanty to the barn, another to free the door of the lean-to where some of the hay is stored. The animals, cows, horses, are alive but shaken, their water frozen solid, their flanks rimed with frost where the wind forced ice through every crack in their shelter. In town, the storm has done worse. The single line of track that connects De Smet to the rest of the world is buried, the cuts filled level with the prairie by snow, packed so hard it rings under the men's shovels like iron. The first time someone walks the 3 miles in to hear what the railroad says, they come back with a story that makes the inside of your chest go hollow. The train is stuck back east, they report, stamping snow from their boots in your tiny kitchen. They try to dig it out, but every time they get one stretch clear, another storm comes and fills it again. The company's sent word they'll wait for a break in the weather. A break. As if winter will politely pause and let them catch up. There are still supplies in the stores then. Flour in the Loftus barrels, coal in the sheds, a few kegs of kerosene waiting to be tapped. People shake their heads at the inconvenience, grumble about the railroad's poor planning, and then go back to their own preparations, trusting that this is only a temporary interruption. But Charles stands longer than most at the edge of town, looking down the line in the direction where the train should come from, and feels the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He has seen storms trap people before. He has seen what happens when help is on the other side of a distance no one can cross. At night, as you both lie awake listening to the faint cracking of contracting wood and the distant restless wail of the wind starting up again, he whispers the truth neither of you want to hear. If the track stays blocked, he says, everything we don't have now we won't see again until spring. You count silently in your head. Sacks of flour, barrels of beans, pounds of salt pork, cords of wood, stacks of hay. You subtract, you divide. The numbers do not stretch as far as they should. The claim shanty, for all its newness, suddenly seems as frail as a cardboard box placed in the path of a river. Out here, with only snow and sky and a few scattered neighbours between you and the horizon, you begin to understand how thin the line is between prepared and one more mouth too many. When Charles suggests moving into town for the rest of the winter, into the half-finished rooms above his store building, you do not argue. You think of the long walk between here and there in a blizzard, the time it would take for him to come back to you if he were caught in town when a storm closed in. You think of Mary, who cannot see the path, and of the younger girls whose legs are not strong enough for such a fight against the wind. It will be crowded, you say, which is true, and noisy. It will be close to the store, he answers, to other people, to coal. You think, to flour, to news, to any chance of help if the worst of the old man's prediction comes to pass. You begin packing before dawn the next day. Upstairs, at the edge of a siege, moving from the claim into town feels less like another beginning and more like a retreat. You load the wagon with only what you must have, beds, blankets, a few dishes, the most necessary of your food, and leave the rest in the shanty, stacked neatly as if organisation alone could protect it from the winter's appetite. The road into De Smet is a narrow throat of trampled snow between drifts on either side, the ruts frozen hard. The horses labour, breath smoking in the cold air. The girls sit hunched together under quilts, faces wrapped in scarves, eyes watering from the wind. As you crest the low rise and the little town comes into view, it looks both more and less real than it did from the claim. A row of huddled buildings crouches along the tracks: store, lumberyard, blacksmith, saloon. Smoke rises from their chimneys in straight, urgent lines before the wind snatches it away. Charles's building is unfinished, board still rough, paint only a plan for some future, more forgiving season. Inside, the storeroom smells of fresh-cut wood and flour dust. The upstairs space that will be your winter home is a plain, low-ceilinged room with slanting walls and a single small window looking out over the tracks. It is not much, but it is something the claim shanty cannot be. Close to other beating hearts. You haul the beds up the narrow stairs, your legs trembling with effort and cold. You spread your quilt on a floor that still has splinters. You set Mary's chair where she can sit with her face to the light. You find a place for the stove and listen to its first, hesitant ticking as it heats. Below, you can hear the muffled thud of boots on the store floor, the murmur of men's voices, the occasional shout as someone wrestles a barrel into place. The sound is oddly comforting. Loneliness, you have learned, is its own kind of threat. When the next storm comes, and it will, sooner than anyone expects, you will not be standing alone in a house on the open prairie, hoping the wind does not decide to move you like a piece in some cruel game. You will be here, in a town not yet 3 years old, with neighbours close enough to hear a knock on the wall. You do not know yet that the railroad will not send another train for 7 long months, that the coal piles will shrink to nothing, that the barrels in every store in De Smet will empty more slowly than anyone admits. You do not know yet that you will spend hours twisting hay into tight sticks just to keep this little stove alive, that you will grind seed wheat meant for spring into coarse flour just to get through another day. For now, you know only this. The first warning has come and gone. The train has not. You stand at the upstairs window with Mary's hand resting light on your arm and watch the pale sky harden over the snow-covered tracks. Somewhere out there, beyond where you can see, lies the rest of the world. Up here, above a half-stocked store in a barely born town, with winter gathering itself for another assault, your family draws in closer around the small hot circle of the stove. The long season has not truly begun, but you are in place now for whatever it decides to bring. At first, living above the store feels almost like safety. The room is small, yes. Low ceiling, slanting walls, just enough space for the beds along one side and the stove and table on the other. But there are sounds here you never had on the claim. The steady thunk of boots on the floorboards downstairs. The murmur of voices as men come in from the cold to argue over flour prices or mail delivery. The sharp ring of the blacksmith's hammer somewhere down the street. Noise means people. People mean help, or at least the comfort of knowing you are not the only ones holding your breath when the wind rises. From your one small window, you can see the single line of track that ties De Smet to the rest of the world. When the sky is clear, it gleams faintly, a strip of dull metal slicing west and east until distance swallows it. You find your eyes drifting to it again and again, as if you could bring a train over the horizon by staring hard enough. It does not come. Days after the first blizzard, the railroad sends word. The cuts east of town are filled in level with the prairie. Drifts stand higher than a man, hard as rock. Crews dig, but every time they open a path, another storm rolls in and erases their work. Soon as there's a break, the train'll get through, someone says downstairs. You hear the word soon and feel nothing in particular. On the frontier, soon is a way of pretending you can bargain with the weather. You know better. A town under siege. The storms do not come one at a time, with proper pauses between for rest and mending. They come like a drumbeat that keeps speeding up until you cannot tell where one stroke ends and the next begins. There are days of blinding white, when the town vanishes into noise and motion. The wind hurls snow so thick against your window that it is like looking into a sack of flour. The stovepipe thrums, the walls creak, and you can feel the building sway in gusts strong enough to tear a roof clean off if they find the right angle. Then there are days of a deceptive calm, when the sun burns in a brittle blue sky and a light glances off the drift so fiercely it makes your eyes ache. Those are the digging days. Men wrap rags around their faces and go out with shovels and scoops, trying to clear doorways, open paths between houses, free the stock that has not frozen yet. From the window above the store you see them, dark shapes moving slowly against a landscape that looks like a frozen ocean. You count how many heads go out. You count how many come back in. Inside, your own world has shrunk to the orbit of the stove. Mary sits where you place her, hands folded or busy with some small necessary task, peeling potatoes by feel, stitching seams she cannot see, rolling bandages tighter and tighter to fit in the basket. She listens to the wind the way some people listen to music, head tilted, every tendon in her neck drawn taut. Laura is forever half in and half out of the tiny room, carrying coal up from the dwindling heap in the shed, helping Pa downstairs in the store, checking on neighbours when the storm slackens just enough to risk it. She comes back with snow in her hair and stories in her mouth, whose chimney blew down, whose cow was found half buried, whose baby cried all night from the cold. Carrie and Grace cling to routine as if it were another blanket. Morning porridge, no matter how thin. Lessons at the table in whatever light seeps in around the frost at the window's edge. Games made up with buttons and scraps of cloth when the slate feels too cold to hold. You move through it all with the tight, economical motions of someone who knows there is no room for waste. Not of food, not of fuel, not of strength. Downstairs, Charles does his sums with a care that is new even for him. Every barrel that leaves the store is another day shaved off the town's margin of safety, and he cannot simply refuse to sell. His neighbours are as trapped as you are. But each time he lifts a scoop of flour or weighs out a few more pounds of coal, he can feel the bottom of the barrel rising to meet him. At first, people speak of the storms the way they always have, as nuisances, as tests of grit, as stories to be told someday with a laugh. By December, no one is laughing. When the coal runs out, it does not happen all at once. Nothing does out here. It is a matter of watching piles shrink little by little until one day you look and there is almost nothing left. The coal in town was never meant to last a winter like this. The railroads hadn't expected to be cut off. Merchants hadn't expected to go months without replenishing their stores. Ordinary families hadn't expected to need a fire at all hours just to keep fingers from stiffening too much to work. You feel it first in the way Charles measures out the chunks for the stove. Smaller, more careful. He hesitates before tossing in another piece, judges the heat with his palm, decides he can make do with less. We'll bank it at night, he tells you. Rake the coals together, cover them with ash, let it smoulder till morning. You already do that, have done it everywhere you've ever lived. The difference now is that there is no more coal coming when this pile is gone. No distant car loaded with black rock inching its way toward De Smet. Only what is already here, in scattered sheds and cellars and barrels. One raw afternoon, the first word comes from down the street. The Loftus store is out. Says people crowd into your little place below, breath steaming, faces tight with something uglier than ordinary worry. They ask what you have left, how much, what price. Charles tells them the truth. For a while longer, you share what you can. Equal measures, fair weights. No favourites. Neighbours watch one another's scoops anxiously. There are arguments, then apologies, then more arguments. Hunger and cold bring out parts of people they would rather pretend do not exist. When the day finally comes that Charles closes the lid on the last coal barrel and cannot in good conscience open it again for anyone, he stands for a long time with his hand on the rough wood. "There's none?" you ask quietly when he comes back upstairs. "None," he says. "Not in any store, not in any shed I know of." You look at the stove, at the tiny red glow that is all that stands between this room and the outside air that can freeze a bucket of water in an hour. "Then we'll burn something else," you answer. Out on the prairie, trees were always rare. Here in town, boards and fence posts and any scrap of lumber that can be spared begin to feed stoves. But wood, like coal, is finite. Houses cannot burn their own foundations. There is one thing the prairie has in abundance, even under snow: grass, twisted into tight sticks, dried, and fed carefully to the fire. It will burn quick and hot. Not like coal, not for long, but long enough to heat a pot of water or take the edge off the worst of the cold. So you learn another kind of work. Twisting hay into fire. It starts with a talk no one wants to have. "We'll have to use the hay," Charles says one morning, his breath hanging white in the upstairs air even with the stove lit. "Not just for the stock, for us." You think of the stacks out by the claim, of the months of sweat that went into them, of the animals that still stand in your barnyard, ribs sharp under their winter coats. Then you think of your children's hands, already red and chapped, another day colder still. "The cows will eat snow for water," he continues, as if trying to reassure you. "Other families have done it in bad years. If we stretch the stacks carefully, share where we can." You nod. There is nothing else to say. Survival here is always a matter of turning one necessity into another and hoping the cost does not come due all at once. The first time you twist hay for burning, your fingers protest at the unfamiliar strain. You take a small armful of the long, dry grass, lay it across your lap and begin to roll. back and forth, tighter and tighter, until it becomes a kind of rope. Then you bend it double and twist again, forcing the strands to cling to each other. Hay sticks, once made, are slightly thicker than your wrist and as long as your arm. They must be perfectly tight. Any looseness, and they will smoulder uselessly, wasting both heat and fodder. Laura learns quickly, her strong young hands working with a rhythm that soon matches yours. You sit on boxes or overturned buckets in the store's cold back room because there is simply no space upstairs, your knees wrapped in old rags to keep the stiff grass from cutting through your skirts. Mary cannot help twist. Her fingers tire too quickly, and the work must be precise. Instead, she helps lay the finished sticks in bundles, stacking them so that air can move through and dry them. She listens as you and Laura talk, weaving the shape of the work into a mental picture of a winter she cannot see. Carrie begs to try. You let her, for a time, though the strands bite her small palms and the hay leaves fine cuts along her wrists. She cries in frustration when her first few attempts fall apart, but after a while she produces something that will hold together long enough to burn. You praise her, not for the stick itself, but for her refusal to give in. The store fills with the dry, dusty smell of grass. It gets into your throat, your hair, the seams of your clothes. At night, when you lie down, your fingers still feel as if they are twisting. Every morning and every afternoon, as you carry an armload of finished sticks up the steep stairs and stack them by the stove, a different kind of fuel pile from any you have known before. When you feed the first of them into the fire, you watch the way it catches. A sudden bloom of flame, fierce and brief. The stick is gone in minutes, leaving only a smear of ash where a day's labour once lay. You swallow down the sick, useless flare of anger at that. Survival out here has always been this trading of hours for moments. 3 days to build a shelter, 20 minutes to see it flattened by wind. A summer's worth of crops, a week's worth of locusts. So you twist more, days without edges. As the storms stack up through December and into the new year, time in the upstairs room begins to lose its edges. There are no clear markers anymore. No Sunday church with neighbours riding in from scattered claims. No regular arrivals of mail carried along the tracks. No visiting peddlers with their boxes of tinware and bright-coloured thread. Even the light becomes unreliable, smothered by snow one day, almost blinding the next as it bounces off the drifts. You measure the days by smaller things, by the dwindling of the flour in its sack, by the way the children's clothes hang looser on their frames, by how long the hay pile downstairs lasts before you must send someone, when the wind will allow it, to fetch more from the distant stacks. Upstairs, you keep the routines that can be kept. Morning and evening prayers, not because you think they will bring a thaw any sooner, but because without them you fear the whole fragile structure of your days will unravel. Lessons continue at the table, figures scratched on slate, letters copied and recited. Mary's fingers move over raised lines and knots you have sewn for her, making her own kind of book from whatever scraps you can spare. Sometimes, in the deep heart of a storm when the wind's howl drowns out nearly everything else, you tell stories. Not the neat, polished ones the world will someday know from printed pages, but the rawer, harder-edged versions that still live in your memory. Nights in dugouts, summers of grasshoppers, roads that led nowhere in particular. You leave out some parts for the younger girl's sake, others you smooth for your own. Laura listens, her eyes dark and steady, storing away every detail the way she always has. Mary listens, too. With that same deliberate attentiveness, her sightless gaze turned slightly inward. You can almost feel the two of them shaping something in their minds, some way to make sense of a life that so often refuses to make sense at all. Below, the town adjusts to its siege conditions as best it can. Families that thought they had enough fuel band together with those who never did. People share what they have or sometimes hide it, ashamed to be seen hoarding while others go without. There is very little comfort to spare. Only the bare, stubborn fact that you are all, for the moment, still here. Scraping the bottom of the barrel one morning, as you are measuring flour for the day's bread, the scoop scrapes wood. You pause, me listening to the sound as if it were a language you do not quite understand. Then you reach in with your hand instead and feel only a thin dusting of powder along the bottom of the sack. You have stretched it as far as it can go. More water, less flour, thinner loaves, smaller slices. There is nothing left to stretch. You stand there a long time, your hand still inside the empty sack, the cold of the unheated corner seeping up through the floor into your toes. The children are quiet behind you. Even Grace, who usually fusses when she's hungry, seems to know this is not a moment to demand anything. Charles comes up from the store and takes in the scene without needing to ask what has happened. His eyes go to the shelf where the sack sits crumpled and light, then to the girls, then back to you. "We knew it was coming," he says gently. "We've known." Knowing and meeting are not the same. "What are we to eat?" Carrie whispers, voice thin as paper. You open your mouth to answer and find that nothing comes out. All the usual words. "We'll manage," "Pa will see to it," "God will provide," feel suddenly too heavy and too light at the same time. Charles breaks the silence. "There's seed wheat," he says, "in town, in the Loftus store, meant for planting come spring." "Seed isn't meant for eating," you say automatically. "On farms, that is a law as strict as any written one. Seed is the future, not the present. To eat it is to give up a whole harvest before it is even sown." He nods. "I know, but seed that never reaches the ground because we've died before the thaw won't grow either." You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again. Practicalities come back into focus. The empty sack, the cold stove already burning hay faster than you can twist it. The children's thin faces turn toward you. "If they'll sell it," you say. "If they'll sell it," he agrees, "and if someone can get to it." The wind has dropped for the moment. Outside, the skies are dull, powdered white, more snow hanging low over drifts that have not yet settled from the last storm. There is a narrow window of time in which a man might fight his way down the street into the heart of town and back again before the weather changes its mind. Charles pulls on his coat, wraps the scarf twice around his neck, and checks the rope he's taken to carrying in storms, a lifeline from door to door, a way to feel his way back if his eyes fail him in the whiteout. He pauses at the top of the stairs and looks back once more. "Keep the girls close to the stove," he says. "Make what you can from what's left. I'll bring back whatever they'll let me." You nod, then stop him with a hand on his sleeve. "Bring back the wheat," you say quietly. "And bring back the coffee mill. If you're going to eat seed, it will have to become something else first, something that looks and feels even a little like flour." He smiles, a quick wry twist of the mouth that has more courage than joy in it. "I'll see what can be done," he says. Then he goes down into the cold and out into a town that is staring the same emptiness in the bottom of its barrels, and walks toward the store where the last hope of wheat sits tied up in sacks meant for another season. Upstairs, you turn back to the stove, to the haystacks, to the waiting faces, and begin to count out the hours until he returns. He's not gone long enough for you to stop listening for his boots. Downstairs, the store door bangs open and shut a few times as men fight the wind, but none of those footsteps climb the stairs. You keep your hands moving, rearranging what little there is on the shelf, tucking blankets tighter around Grace, because if you stop, the silence presses in too hard. When the tread on the stairs finally is his, you know it by weight alone. Slower than in autumn, when the first snows came and he still believed the storm would pass in a week. He comes in with the cold, clinging to his coat and a sack in his arms. Not a big sack, not the generous, bulging weight of harvest time. A small, tight one tied hard with string. In his other hand he carries a wooden box with a handle fixed to the top. He sets both on the table and looks at you first, then at the girls. "They'll sell seed wheat," he says quietly. "For now," and Loftus lent this. You wipe your hands on your apron and touch the box. A coffee mill, square, worn smooth at the edges where other hands have gripped it, the iron crank dulled by years of turning. Once, someone bought this to grind a morning luxury. Now it sits in front of you as the difference between eating and not. You do not say that aloud, not with the little ones listening. "Show me," you answer instead. Learning the new work. He unties the string on the sack and opens it with a care that would suit a silk dress. Inside, the wheat glows a dull, living gold, each kernel hard and perfect. So seed. Every handful meant for furrows that may never be planted if you use too much now. He cups some in his palm and lets the girls feel it. "Smell, Grace," he says gently, guiding the toddler's fingers. "This is wheat." Laura leans in. Even Mary does. Her blind eyes turn toward the faint, dry scent. You see her swallow. She remembers what bread used to taste like, just as you do. The coffee mill opens at the top. You pour in a small measure, hear the rattle of kernels hitting the metal teeth inside. Then you set your hand to the crank. It fights you at first. The handle jerks and catches as the iron gears bite into something much harder than coffee beans. The whole box wants to twist away. You brace it with your other hand, knuckles whitening, turn. At first, nothing seems to happen. The same rough resistance, the same scrape of metal. Then, after long minutes, there is a change in the sound, a softening. A faint dust begins to sift from the chute into the waiting cup. More grit than flour, but changed all the same. You glance up at Charles. "How long?" you ask. "Loftus says a cup at a time," he answers. 20 minutes or so, if you keep at it steady." 20 minutes. For a single cup. You do the reckoning without saying it. How much this family needs in a day, how many times your arm will have to circle before night, how many days that sack can stretch if you're very careful and very strict. "All right," you say. "Then we start." You pass the handle to Laura. Her young wrist flexes, finding the rhythm. The sound of the crank fills the small room, a low, relentless rasp that settles into the very bones of the place. It will be the sound of your days now. Bread that barely rises. By the time the first grey light seeps through the ice-skimmed window, the cup under the mill is half full of coarse meal. Not fine, not white. Nothing like the sifted flour you once bought in generous sacks. This is sharp between your fingers, the broken edges of outer husks scraping your skin. Still, it is something you can bake. You heat a little water on the stove, watching the tiny blue flame devour another carefully twisted stick of hay. Every fire now feels like a small decision. This warmth in exchange for that fuel, for that hour you spent wrestling dry grass into something that burns. You stir in a pinch of salt, the last in the bottom of the tin, and work the meal into a dough. It does not come together easily. There is no fat to soften it, no yeast to make it live. You knead it with the heel of your hand until it holds shape, your fingers stinging from the cold and the rough grain. When you set the small loaf in the oven, there is a moment when the smell that rises almost fools you. Warmth and something like comfort, reaching into the corners of the room. The girls all turn toward the stove as if pulled. Grace whimpers once, then clamps her lips shut, as if ashamed to let the hunger show. Carrie wraps her arms tight across her own narrow ribs, eyes fixed on the oven door. Mary sits very straight, hands folded. You can see the faint movement in her throat as she swallows, as if the scent alone might be enough to fill her. She says nothing. She almost never does, about hunger. The bread comes out flat and heavy, bites more like a thick brown slab than a loaf. You let it cool only as long as it takes to keep it from burning small fingers, then set it on the table. You do not cut generous slices. You do not carve the heel for par, as you would once have done without thinking. You take out the knife and divide the loaf into thin, precise portions, each one an exact part of the whole. One for each child, one for Charles, one for you. The crust is tough. The inside is close and damp, the bran scratching at the roof of your mouth. It does not melt on the tongue the way fine bread does. It sits there, a solid presence you must work at. But when you swallow, there is at least the feeling of something inside your belly. Grace chews in solemn concentration. Carrie closes her eyes between bites, as if willing herself to remember the taste of other bread and lay it over this one. Mary eats slowly, carefully, her fingers following the edge of the slice so she will not take more than is hers. When she is done, she murmurs, Thank you, Ma. You know she means more than manners. The day marked by the crank. After that, the pattern settles over you like an extra quilt, and like a quilt, it grows heavier with time. Morning, coax the fire back to life from whatever faint ember survived the night, your breath held while you rake aside the ash and search for the smallest red glow. While the pot warms, someone sets the coffee mill on the table. Its iron teeth have already chewed grooves into Laura's palms. Your own shoulders ache where the muscles knot from the same motion, over and over. Sus, but the wheat will not grind itself. Crank, crank, crank. The sound fills the room, a rough rhythmic scrape that becomes the clock you live by. 30 turns for the time it takes Grace to recite her numbers, 100 for Carrie to copy a verse on her slate with numbed fingers, several hundred before the cup is full enough to matter. When your arm gives out, you pass the handle to Laura. When Laura's wrist burns, she passes it back. Sometimes Charles takes a turn when he comes up from the store, his big hand moving the handle more easily, but his time is not his own. There are neighbours still coming downstairs, still hoping against hope there might be something left on the shelves. The same everywhere, he tells you one noon, flexing his cramped fingers. Every house you pass, you can hear it. That little mill grinding. You imagine it. In every cramped room above a store, in every shanty dug into a drift at the edge of town, women bent over the same plain box, turning the same stubborn handle. A faint chain of sound binding De Smet together, house to house, the frontier's answer to church bells. Mary hears it too, of course. She has begun to use it the way other people use the angle of the sun. It must be near midday, she says once, when the crank has been going long enough to make your elbow throb. You've been grinding so long. Longer still before supper, you answer, meaning it lightly if you can. She tilts her head, listening to the wind pressing at the walls, to the rasp of iron on wheat, to the quiet clink of Carrie setting out tin plates. We are not starving, she says, more to herself than to you. Not yet. You bite back the quick reply that comes to your tongue, that there's a wide country between fed and starving, and you all walk it now. Instead, you reach out and smooth back the hair from her forehead. Not while there is wheat to grind, you tell her, and not while there is strength left in your hands to do it. Eating. Tomorrow to stay in today, seed wheat is not meant for a table. You know that more keenly than anyone. A lifetime on farms has taught you that some things are the future, and to spend them early is to bargain poorly with the years ahead. But each time you loosen the knot at the top of the sack and scoop out another measure, the future is exactly what you are eating. Charles keeps the sack downstairs now, away from Small, and desperate hands and eyes that might be tempted to take more than they should. He weighs each day's share, careful as a banker sorting coin. A cup and a little more, perhaps, if Grace has coughed through the night or if Laura's dress hangs looser than it did last week. Never less than enough to keep them on their feet. Never so much that you forget what this really is. At night, when the girls finally sleep in their narrow beds, you and Charles sit close to the faint glow of the stove and speak in low voices about figures. Not dollars and cents this time, but days and bushels. If we keep to what we're using now, he murmurs, tracing invisible columns on the table with one work-roughened finger, we can stretch it another 3 weeks, 4 if we tighten our belts. And if the train does not come in 4 weeks, you ask? He looks at you then in that way you have come to know too well over the years, facing something he cannot fiddle or joke his way past. Then we'll see what else can be done, he says finally. Maybe the company starts digging again. Maybe the wind shifts. Maybe some fellow south of town truly has a binful he can be talked into parting with. Maybe, you echo. You both know maybe is doing too much work in that sentence. Still, the next morning you get up and grind. Because whatever may come, children need to eat today. Spring planting is a problem for some other dawn, some other strength you do not yet have. Hunger without drama. Hardship, in stories, often comes in sudden blows. Fires and floods, wolves at the door, storms that tear roofs away in a night. You've had those too. In the years behind you, this is different. This is hardship that erodes instead of strikes. No one in upstairs rooms like yours is collapsing in the street from hunger. That is not how this winter works. Instead, skirts grow looser on hips, faces leaner, collars more hollow. Grace's round cheeks have edged into angles. Carrie's wrists look too thin for her hands. Even Laura, who has always burned through food as fast as you can put it in front of her, moves more slowly now, as if everything she does is taking a fraction more effort than it did in October. You feel it in yourself as well. You and Charles take the smallest portions, though neither of you says so aloud. It shows in the way you push bits of your crust toward Grace when she's not looking. Yeah, in the way he claims that coffee, or what passes for it now, sits heavy on his stomach and pours half his cup back to be shared. The cold is a different companion than it was at the start. Then, it was an enemy you fought with extra shawls and bravado. Now, it is simply another presence in the room, familiar as the table. Your hands are always a little numb. Your feet are never quite warm. You notice it less because there is never a moment when you are not noticing it. Some afternoons the girls grow unusually quiet. They sit near the stove and stare at nothing, each caught in her own thin circle of thought. You could scold them for idleness, set them to some task, but there comes a point where there is only so much energy to divide, and you have all agreed silently that staying upright is work enough. When the storms ease for a day or two, Charles goes out to twist more hay from the stacks at the edge of town. He comes back with his beard rimed in ice, and his shoulders bowed, arms full of bundles that will burn away in less time than it took to make them. How is it at the others' houses, you ask, always the same question. Much like here, he answers. You can hear their mills going, hear the children, they're making do. Anyone? Worse off. He hesitates, then nods. Some came west with less to fall back on than we did, he says. Big families, small barns. There are mouths in this town counting on that wheat to go a long way. You think of those other mothers, some your age, some barely older than Laura, each with her own measure of grain, her own stubborn little mill. They are not in any book and never will be. But their days look very much like yours. Twist, grind, measure, divide, endure. It is not a story that would interest people who like tidy morals and grand gestures, but it is the one you are living. A small mercy in late winter. It is nearly the middle of February when a new sound threads itself into the life of the store below. At first, you notice it only as a change in the way the floor vibrates under your feet. A deeper, more regular thrum beneath the usual muffled talk and shuffle of boots. Then one day, when Laura comes back up the stairs with her skirt dusted in fine brown powder, you see the difference in her eyes. They've rigged a bigger mill, she says, half out of breath. Downstairs, Mr. Loftus and one of the men. Not a gristmill, but something with bigger stones. You can bring wheat and have them grind it there. It's faster. You picture it. Some contrivance of spinning wheels and grinding plates, turned by a longer handle or by more than one pair of hands at once. You think of the hours you have spent this winter with your arm circling, of the raw places on your palms and the nights when your shoulder throbbed too hard to let you sleep. How much faster, you ask. 3 cups in the time it takes us to make one, she answers. Maybe more if 2 men work the crank. It is not a miracle. It does not make new wheat where none exists, does not conjure coal from the frozen ground. But it is a mercy of a kind you have learned not to ask for. A way to buy back a few hours of your own strength from the grindstone. The next clear day, you tie a scarf over your hair. Tuck the day's measure of wheat under your arm and go down yourself. The cold in the stairwell makes your lungs ache. The light on the main floor seems strange after so many weeks in the close, dim room above. The mill stands in the corner, improvised but determined. A small queue of women has already formed, each with her own sack. You take your place among them, feeling the odd comfort of shoulders at your back and elbows at your side. No one talks much. Now and then, a practical word passes between you. How much wheat you brought. How the children are faring, whether anyone has heard lately from towns farther east. Underneath, the common thought, how many more days can we stretch this? When your turn comes, you pour in the wheat. The broader crank takes both your hands, but the movement is smoother, the stones wider. Flour. still coarse but finer than the coffee mill's meagre output, spill steadily into your sack. You thank the men at the handle. You thank silently whoever thought to spare the time and effort to build such a thing when everyone is already worn thin. Carrying the warm, powdered weight back up the stairs, you feel a little giddy, not from the exertion, but from the thought of what that freed hour will mean. Time to mend Mary's worn sleeve, time to rest your arm, time simply to sit, just for a few minutes, without turning or twisting anything at all. It is not enough to change the shape of the winter, but it is enough to remind you that, even now, people are still finding ways to lighten each other's loads by the smallest of degrees, waiting for what has not yet shown itself at night. When the house is settled and the last ember under the ash gives off its faint, stubborn glow, you think about all the things this winter has already taken from you. Comfort, variety, ease, any illusion that the world is gentle. You do not yet know what it may give back. Somewhere beyond the circle of land you can imagine from your narrow window, a track still lies buried in white. Somewhere past that, in some other town that has not vanished from the timetable, there are cars full of flour and coal and oranges and coffee that cannot yet reach you. Somewhere to the south, men like Almanzo Wilder are looking at the same sky you are, feeling the same clamp of cold around their lungs and weighing, just as you and Charles are, the dangerous question of whether staying still will be enough. For now, in this upstairs room, your world is smaller than those questions. It is measured in cups of ground wheat, in the even slices you lay on tin plates, in the quiet courage of girls who eat without complaint. You will go on grinding tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, as long as there is seed left in the sack and strength left in your hands. And somewhere beyond the reach of your knowing, the winter is already beginning, by the smallest of degrees, to loosen its hold. By the time the first sack of wheat is light enough to lift with one hand, the days have begun to run together so badly that you only know it is a Sunday, because Charles leaves his coat on the peg a little longer. The routine has settled into the family's bones, twist, grind, bake, divide. There is nothing left to trim from it, no second helpings to cut away, no treats to remove, and no hidden corner of the pantry to discover, for the sake of the children's hope. You tell yourself that as long as there is something to grind, there is no need to think beyond the next loaf. Then one morning, reaching into the sack downstairs with your own hand instead of a scoop, your fingers close around the bottom seam. A thin dusting of kernels shivers against your palm. Not enough for many more days, certainly not for weeks. You climb the stairs more slowly than you meant to, the half-empty sack pulled tight against your hip. In the little room above the store, the girls look up as you come in. 4 sets of eyes, one pair unseeing but turned toward you all the same. It isn't gone yet, you say, before anyone asks. But it will be. You mean it as a plain fact. It lands in the room like a verdict. A different kind of meeting. That afternoon, when the wind lies down just enough that you can hear more than its constant howl. Voices rise from the store below in a way they have not for weeks. Not the steady trickle of customers, but a gathering, low, urgent, all talking over one another and then falling suddenly silent. Charles shrugs on his coat. They're calling a meeting, he says, about the wheat. What is there left to say, you ask? The question comes out sharper than you intended. He pauses, hand on the doorknob. Maybe nothing, he admits. Maybe something. I'll listen. When he's gone, the floor under your feet carries the tremor of men shifting their weight, boots scraping, a chair dragged across the boards. Every now and then a single word floats up clearly. Seed, starve, spring, before being swallowed again. Laura moves closer to the stove, her slate forgotten on the table. Do you think they found more? Carrie whispers, as if there's anyone in town now who could have a secret like that and keep it. Found or heard, you say. Sometimes a rumour has to come before the thing itself. You know better than to trust rumours. But in a winter like this, even an untrustworthy hope is something the mind reaches for. The rumour with teeth. When Charles comes back up, his cheeks are flushed from the close air downstairs, not from cold. He closes the door carefully behind him, as if he needs the barrier in order to decide what to say. "Well?" you ask. He lets out a breath. "There's talk of a man south of town," he says. "A settler on his timber claim. Folks say he's got wheat laid by. Seed wheat. A good lot of it." "How far south?" "Depends on who you ask. 12 miles, some say. More, if you count the way the drifts lie." 12 miles, in a good season, would be a half-day's journey there and back for strong horses and a light wagon. 12 miles now through broken, uneven snow, with no landmarks but fence posts, and the occasional buried haystack is something else entirely. "Is it certain he has it?" you press. "Not just something someone dreamed up to keep their courage?" "There's a name to him this time," Charles answers. "Anderson, they say. He broke sod on his timber ground last year and sowed wheat on the 5 acres. 30, 40 bushels to the acre. If you believe the talk, 30 or 40 bushels. Numbers like that sound absurd when you have spent the last month measuring food in cups and spoonfuls. Enough, if it exists, to keep a town from slipping over the line between hunger and something worse." "But it's seed," you say, "meant for planting." He nods. Men downstairs argue that he has no right to keep it to himself when children are thinning to bone. Others say a man has a right to his own labour, and if we eat what should go in the ground, we are borrowing against a harvest that may never come. He does not say which side he leans toward. He does not have to. You have lived beside his brand of a hope for too many years not to recognise it. The kind that wants a solution so badly it is tempted to declare one where none has yet been proved. "What did they decide?" you ask at last. His mouth tightens. "They decided to find out whether there is wheat at all before they argue over how to divide it," he says, "and for that someone has to go." Men who volunteer. You can almost see the scene downstairs without needing eyes on it. The way men look at the door when someone says go, then at their own hands. The quick inventory of strength left in their bodies, of what or who waits for them at home. The shame of wanting to stay. The fear of wanting to leave. "Did they ask for someone?" you say. "No one was ordered," Charles answers, "but the need hung there." He leans his shoulders back against the door and closes his eyes, just for a heartbeat. When he opens them again, there is a different weight in his gaze. "Royal Wilder spoke first," he says. "Said he had no call to risk his life when he'd already brought seed of his own from Marshall and hidden it against just such a winter, that if anyone tried to force him to sell it for eating, they'd be asking him to throw away the future for the sake of a few weeks' comfort." You bristle instinctively at the word comfort. There is nothing comfortable about what you've been doing with that wheat, but you understand the rest. And then his brother spoke, Charles says. Almanzo. You've seen the Wilder brothers about town this past year. Royal with his shopkeeper's stoop and guarded eyes. Almanzo with that quiet way of standing that makes him seem both younger and older than his years. A man who has known hard work on decent land, you guessed, by the way he handles a horse. "What did he say?" Laura asks, breath catching a little on the name. She has noticed him too. "He said there were rumours of wheat that wasn't his," Charles replies, "and that it sat out there on the prairie, doing no one any good while we all sat in here doing no more than count what we don't have." He looks from one girl to the next, then back to you. "He said he'd go," he finishes quietly, "if someone would ride with him. You do not mean to grip the back of the chair so hard. The wood creaks under your fingers anyway." "And someone did? A boy? Nearly a man?" The faintest hint of a smile touches Charles's mouth. There and gone. Cap Garland. You know him, straw hair, that grin he wears like armour. He stepped forward before anyone could stop him, said 2 horses could pull more than one. And there was no use sending a man out alone on a gamble like this. 2 horses, 2 riders, 12 miles out if the rumours are true, and the same back with sled and sacks heavy enough to drag them into every hidden drift, all between storms that no one can predict. You picture them for a moment. Almanzo's Morgan team hitched to a low sled, breath smoking in the air, Cap with his cap jammed low over bright eyes, light jacket no match for the kind of cold that waits outside town. You think of their mothers, Royal and Almanzo's far away in Minnesota, Cap's somewhere nearer, and feel an unreasonable anger on their behalf that boys they raised must now offer themselves to winter like this. A different thought comes quicker and truer on its heels. If they do not go, who will? The price of staying behind. For the rest of the day, the house has a strange, unsettled feel, as if it is waiting for something that has not yet quite begun. The girls move a little more quietly than usual, as though there is someone sleeping in the next room whom they do not wish to disturb. You keep your hands busy with the familiar work, setting the sourdough to sponge from the last of yesterday's ground wheat, mending a seam in Carrie's dress where the fabric has finally given up its hold on the thread. But all the while your mind is out on that white, indifferent prairie, tracing and retracing a road you cannot see. Mary sits very straight at the table, her folded hands just touching the coffee mill as if she can feel the day's tension humming through the wood. "They've truly decided," she asks once, when the girls are bent over their lessons and you are pretending to read aloud with your usual calm. "They have," you say. There is no kindness in softening it with uncertainty now. Tomorrow, if the weather lets them, or the next break between storms. Mary nods slowly. "It's worse. Staying and waiting, I think," she says, half to herself. "When Pa goes out in a blizzard, at least he is doing something. But listening, and not knowing," her voice trails off. You do not ask how many nights she lay awake this fall, ears straining for the sound of your own husband's boots, when the first blizzards caught him late at the store. "You will have your share of doing," you tell her gently. "There'll be bread to make from whatever comes of this, one way or the other." It is only later, eager when you lie awake in the narrow bed, listening to Charles's breathing and the low, restless sighs of the wind at the corners of the roof, that the real shape of her words settles in. There are those who will go out and pit their strength against the storm, and there are those who will stay and pit their nerves against the clock. Either way, something will be spent that you do not get back. Hitching up between storms, dawn comes grey and thick, sky pressing down as if the clouds have grown tired of their own weight. There is no clear break, no bright line of blue to bless this day. Only a small lessening of the wind and a fine, mean snow that drifts rather than falls. "It's the best they'll get," Charles says, peering out the frosted pane. Down in the street, such as it is, men gather in twos and threes, hunched shapes in dark coats against the whitening ground. They move with a sort of restrained urgency, no shouting, no wasted gestures. Everyone there knows that time, more than distance, is what will decide how this ends. You stand at the upstairs window with the girls, all of you pressed close to the single square of glass. Mary stays at the table, hands clenched in her lap, but her head is tilted toward the door as if sound might paint her a picture where sight cannot. You see the Wilder brothers at last through the blur of blowing snow. Royal stands back a little, wrapped in a thicker coat, his expression hard to read from above. Almanzo moves among the harnesses and traces with the quiet, efficient touch of someone who's been hitching good horses to heavy loads since boyhood. The team, Prince and Lady, someone said, stand hitched to the low sled, their dark manes tossed by the wind. They are not big in the way some draft horses are, but there is a compact strength in the way they plant their hooves, a refusal to flinch from the cold that matches the set of the young men's shoulders. Cap appears out of the snowy haze a moment later, lanky, sharp-faced, scarf already crusted with frost. Even from here, you can see the bright flash of his grin as he says something to Almanzo, though the wind carries the words away. Men hoist sacks of money, not many, but enough to stand for the town's faith, and lash them down under canvas at the front of the sled. Somewhere under that tied-down bundle is the last of your own cash, coins from a box in the back of the store that once held more, back when trains came and went like clockwork. "Will Pa go with them?" Grace pipes up, voice small in the hush. You shake your head. "He'll stay," you say. "He has work here when they come back." You do not say what his work will be if they do not. The moment the door closes, before they leave, Charles comes up once more. Snowflakes glitter along the edge of his beard and have melted into dark spots on his collarbone where the coat gapes. "They're readying to start," he says. "I thought you'd want—" He doesn't finish. You know. Grace clings to his leg for a moment, then lets go. Carrie stands very straight, jaw clenched. Laura's hands are fists at her sides, though she tries to look as calm as Mary. Tell them. You begin, then stop. Tell them what? To be careful. As if care alone could stop a whiteout on the open prairie. To turn back if the sky goes black and the wind rises, when you know as well as they do how quickly such things can happen with no warning at all. To remember that whole town full of eyes watching their backs as they ride away. Tell them we'll be here, you say instead, waiting and ready for whatever wheat they can bring. Charles nods once. For a second he covers your hand with his, a brief, fierce pressure. Then he is gone again into the cold. You go back to the window. Below, Almanzo swings into the sled. Cap climbs up beside him, light and quick. Someone, Loftus perhaps, steps forward and lays a hand on the nearest horse's neck, his lips moving in words you cannot hear but can guess at. A prayer, maybe, or just a last, impractical reminder to keep the animals' heads to the wind if the sky goes white. Then, with no fanfare at all, the sled moves. The horses lean into their collars, muscles bunching under winter coats. The runners rasp against the packed snow, then slide. A few men call out, a brief cheer, not loud, because there is nothing triumphant in this. Only necessity. You watch as the sled crosses the open space that serves as a street, passes the false-fronted stores now nearly buried to their lower windows, and angles south between drifts that rise higher than a man. For a while, you can track them by the dark shapes of the horses against the pallid horizon. Then the land swallows them bit by bit. First the sled, then the heads, then at last the faintest bobbing of Cap Garland's cap above the white. And then there's nothing to see but wind and snow and the same bleak distance as before. In the little room above the store no one speaks. The emptiness left behind by those two departing figures feels bigger than the space they took up a moment ago, as if the winter has reached in and plucked not just men, but some last solid thing from the town. You turn away from the window at last and lay your hand on the coffee mill. Its wooden sides are worn smooth now, where your fingers have gripped them so many times. Well, you say, because the girls are listening for your voice, there's work yet to do. You pour the day's small measure of wheat into the hopper and set your hand to the crank. The rough, familiar sound starts up again, circling, as steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the wind is already rising. Hours from now, when the light has faded and the room smells again of coarse bread and smoke, you will look at the door and know that there is no way, from here, to tell whether the two young men who went out into that growing storm are riding toward a hidden pile of seed wheat, or toward a white, unmarked place on the prairie where no one ever finds them at all. The first day without word from the wheat run is the longest one yet. You move through the motions you know by heart now, feeding the reluctant fire, stretching the dough from the ground wheat you have left, keeping the girls close to the stove, but everything feels slightly out of step, as if the room itself is listening past its walls. Outside, the light never quite brightens. The wind builds in slow, steady breaths until it becomes once more that living thing that claws at the corners of the building, making the stovepipe moan. This is not the small, mild window of good weather the men had hoped for. It is winter remembering its old strength. Each time a gust rattles the window harder than the one before, you picture two small dark shapes on the open prairie, sled and horses swallowed by a rising wall of white. You imagine them losing the faint line of old wagon ruts, turning in circles, the snow smoothing over their tracks faster than they can make them, and in one unguarded moment, as you stand at the table with your hands sunk deep in dough, a thought knifes through you so sharply you nearly say it aloud. If the storm takes them, the town loses more than two young men. It loses its last, best gamble. You force your hands to keep moving anyway. Bread cannot wait on news. Hunger doesn't. The second night. They do not come back that first night. The sky goes from grey to black with no sunset worth the name. You bank the fire as low as you dare and lie awake listening to the boards creak, counting heartbeats between gusts. Charles breathes steadily beside you. but every so often you feel the bed shift as he too turns his face toward the door he cannot see in the dark. If anyone were to knock in the small hours, half frozen, half dead, needing hot coffee and blankets and someone who knew what to do with fingers, turned waxy with cold, you're ready to move before the sound is finished. No one knocks. In the morning, Charles goes downstairs early. When he comes back up, there is a set to his shoulders that tells you the town is balancing between dread and stubbornness. No word, you ask. Wind's too thick to see half a block, he says. No track's worth the name. Loftus says the horses could have found some hollows in the drifts, some bit of shelter. Ride it out and move on when it eases. Or they could be lying under it, you think, but do not say. The girls watch your face instead of his. You school it into something that resembles patience. We will know when we know, you tell them, and until then we grind, Laura finishes quietly, reaching for the coffee mill. The handle squeaks as it starts its circle. Outside, the storm howls. Between those two sounds, there is nothing for you to do but hold your breath and wait. Somewhere out there in the white. And two young men are either still moving or they aren't, and there is no way from here to tell which it is. A thud on the stairs. Late the next afternoon, when the light has flattened into that dull pewter that means another night of the wind, there is a sudden heavy thump on the stairs. Not the measured tread of Charles, not the lighter scamper of a neighbour child sent on an errand. This is a clumsy, dragging sound, as if someone is hauling something far too heavy for them up each step. The room freezes. Even the crank of the coffee mill stops mid-turn. Then the door bursts open without a knock and Charles all but stumbles inside. Behind him the stairwell yawns, cold and dark. His breath steams in the air like the horses must out there. They're back, he says. His voice is raw with cold and with something like awe. By God, they're back! He steps aside, and for a brief disorienting second you see nothing but shapes. Men shouldered with snow, sacks in their arms, faces burned red-white by wind and cold. Cap Garland appears first, eyes bloodshot in a face chapped nearly raw, scarf crusted with ice. He is grinning the way a boy grins who has just outrun death, and is not yet entirely sure he has left it behind. Behind him, slower but solid as the posts that hold up the building, comes Almanzo Wilder. He looks older than he did 2 days ago, jaw set, lashes rimmed with frost. But he is walking on his own feet, and that alone feels like a miracle. Between them and the men behind, sacks thump onto your floor, each one slumping heavy and solid. The sound echoes up through the soles of your feet. Wheat. Real wheat. For a heartbeat no one moves. Then every girl in the room breathes out at once, as if they had all been holding one shared lungful of air this entire time. You swallow the sob that jumps to your throat. There's no time for that now. Get them blankets, you say briskly, because action is the only answer you have ever trusted. Grace, move away from the door. Carrie, help me clear the table. Laura, take Mr. Garland's coat before it freezes to him. Later, when your hands are no longer shaking, you will hear the story of the trip in bits and pieces. The way the tracks vanished under them, the moment the shanty loomed up out of nowhere like an answer to prayer, the argument with Anderson over price and seed and obligation, but the return through a wind that nearly drove them off the world. For now, you pay attention to the practical things. Hot drink into cold stiffened hands, dry cloth against frostburned skin, the careful way Almanzo shrugs off thanks as if he'd only gone down the street on an errand. You pay attention too to the way Charles looks at those piled sacks. Hunger has one kind of sharpness, relief has another. They have brought back wheat enough that no one in this town will starve outright. That much you can see with your own eyes. What you cannot see yet is what it will cost and to whom once it is measured out downstairs. The price of rescue. The next day the store below is packed so tightly that the air up in your room tastes of other people's breath. Boots shuffle, voices knot together and break apart. It sounds, for the first time in weeks, almost like a real crowd. Almost, because this is not the easy bustle of an ordinary market day. It is the brittle commotion of people who have come to see what stands between them and hunger, and to find out how much they will be allowed. You hear Loftus's voice, thin but carrying, listing the price he means to charge per bushel. You hear the mutter that follows, a low, angry hum like bees roused in a hive. Numbers rise and fall, this many dollars, that many cents. Some arguments are about coin, some about fairness, some about what any man owes his neighbours when the whole town has stared into the same empty barrel. You keep the girls upstairs. There is nothing for them in that crowd but worry. Still sound climbs. You hear Charles's voice finally, however steady but edged. You do not pick out his exact words over the clamour, but you know their shape, a reminder that the wheat was bought to save lives, not to make a fortune, that a man can make a living without making himself a vulture. The murmuring drops to a different pitch after that, resentful in places, relieved in others. The price he and the others hammer out on that splintered counter will not be generous to any single purse, but it will be just low enough that even the poorest families can buy some measure of bread for their children. You catch only a fragment as someone nearer the stairs repeats it under his breath. It is not as high as it could be. It is not as low as any of you wish it were. It will have to be enough. All morning and into the afternoon the thud and rustle continues. Sacks opening, scoops scraping, coins clinking onto wood. Each family leaves with their bag of wheat cradled in their arms as if they carried a baby. Upstairs, you hear their boots on the step, the knock at your door when a neighbour woman pauses on her way home to show you, hands trembling, that she will be able to feed her little ones something more than thin hope this week. It is not the end of want. The blizzards still come. The trains are still buried somewhere east of here, under drifts packed as hard as stone. You're still one bad storm away from disaster. But the edge you have been walking along for weeks no longer drops straight into starvation. There is a narrow, fragile shelf now between you and that fall. It's made of other people's courage, a hard bargain in a sod shanty, and 60 bushels of seed that were never meant to be eaten. That's a scare, and whether you realise it or not, it has bought you something even more precious than the wheat itself, a few more weeks in which to wait for the sound you have almost forgotten how to hope for. When the world begins to melt. In the end, it is not a heroic change in the sky that signals the winter's weakening. It is water. One morning in late April, you step to the window and see that the drifts between the buildings have sagged in on themselves. Not much, just enough to show the curved glint of a buried barrel here, the dark top of a fence post there. The hard, sharp edges of the snowbanks have slumped into softer shapes. Icicles weep steadily from the eaves. Rivulets carve dirty channels down the sides of the packed snow in the street. In the low spots between houses, slush stands ankle deep, hiding sheets of ice beneath. The girls press to the glass like they did in October, but for a different reason now. Listen, Laura whispers. At first you hear only the familiar sounds, a hammer from somewhere, a door slamming against a stubborn drift. Then, underneath, a new note, the steady trickle of water. It is not loud, but once you notice it, you cannot unhear it. The whole town is starting to drip. The snow is going, Carrie says, almost afraid to put it into words. Yes, you say. It is. Mary smiles, sightless eyes turn toward the window, as if she can see the change in the air by the way it tastes. Then the trains will come, she says. You wish you could be as sure as she sounds, because the same snow that is leaving your roofs is running somewhere else into cuts and hollows, onto the already buried tracks. The same ice that is thinning on your doorstep is jamming rivers, breaking free in chunks that knock down bridges and flood lowlands. You hear talk, drifting in on the occasional newspapers that manage to sled or ride in from farther south, of towns along the bigger rivers awash to their doorsteps. Families climbing onto roofs with what little they can carry, watching the water take the rest. Here, the trouble is narrower, but no less stubborn. Deep drifts turn to dense, soggy masses in the railway cuts. Men have begun to go out with shovels and picks, hacking at the snow that lies between you and the east, but it is like chipping at rock, and every day they do not break through, you scrape the bottom of your own small barrel. The wheat from Anderson's claim does not last forever. It was never meant to. You actually see the last of it one morning in early May, a thin dusting in the sack downstairs that looks painfully like the emptiness you faced before. You stand there with your hand still buried in it and feel the old familiar tightening in your chest. After everything, are you about to slip back into the same place you started from, Then, on a day so ordinary in every other way that you will remember its exact light for the rest of your life, the sound comes. The whistle. It is mid-morning. The upstairs room smells of damp wool and the faint sour tang of the starter bubbling in the pan. Laura has just set the coffee mill down, shaking life back into her hand, when a distant note threads itself through the groan of the wind. At first you think you've imagined it. A high, thin cry from far away, almost lost against the creak of the building. Then it comes again. Mary's head snaps up. "What was that?" she breathes. You don't answer. You're already moving to the window, heart pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat. Outside, the world is a patchwork of old snow and new mud. Men are standing in the street, bareheaded despite the chill, their faces all turned in the same direction, east toward the buried tracks. The sound swells, no longer thin, no longer doubtful. A long, rising wail that you've heard 100 times in other places, other years, but never with this particular weight behind it. A train whistle. You've imagined this moment so often that for a second it feels unreal, like something you conjured out of your own hunger. Then Charles is suddenly in the doorway, our eyes bright in his lean face. "It's coming," he says uselessly, because the whistle is already declaring it to anyone with ears. They've finally dug through. The girls burst into a confusion of questions. When will it get here? How many cars? What it might be carrying? But their voices are only a thin embroidery around that great steady note that keeps rising and falling like a breath. You all crowd to the window, even Mary, who grips Laura's arm and leans close to the wavy glass as if it might somehow give her back her sight for this single thing. Far down the line, beyond where the buildings give way to open prairie, a smear of darker smoke stains the sky. As you watch, it grows thicker, closer, resolving into a plume pouring up from behind the low hill that has hidden the tracks all these months. Then the engine itself noses into view, black against the last of the snow. Its sides are scabbed with ice and dirt. It moves more slowly than you remember, like an old man feeling his way across an unfamiliar floor. Cars trail behind it, loaded so heavily the wheels seem to shudder with every turn. It is the most beautiful, ungainly thing you have ever seen. When it finally grinds to a halt at the little platform the town laid out in faith before the storms began, the sound of the brakes shrieking makes you want to cover your ears. Instead, you laugh. A short, startled sound that turns into something wetter when you see men running toward it through the mud, hands raised, shouting wordlessly. Below you, the store door flies open and slams again and again as people pour out into the street. Someone whoops. Someone else simply drops to their knees in the slush and bows their head. You close your eyes for a moment and let the noise roll over you. The whistle, the voices, the slow, deep exhale of the engine as it finally comes to rest. You have lived so long inside the tight circle of your own upstairs room that you had almost forgotten what it feels like when the wider world breaks back in. After the days that follow are dizzying. Barrels of flour, white, soft, almost shocking after the coarse brown bread you have chewed for months, roll through store doors. Crates of salt pork, sacks of sugar, tins of coffee, bolts of cloth, even small luxuries like dried fruit and candy pour into a town that has grown used to thinking only in terms of need. There is coal, too. Real coal, clean-burning and heavy, that will sit in a stove and smoulder all night without demanding hours of twisting from your hands. The first time you cook with it again, your fingers feel almost idle. You do not quite trust the ease of it. You see the change in the girls' faces first. A little more colour in Carrie's cheeks, a less hollow look around Laura's dark eyes. Grace's hands, which had grown too thin at the wrists, begin to fill out again as she reaches for pieces of biscuit that flake in a way she had nearly forgotten bread could. Neighbours send small, guilty gifts back and forth, an orange shared between 3 families, a spoonful of preserves on a scrap of bread for someone else's child. Everyone knows they are still poor, still in debt, still living at the ragged edge of another hard year. But for the first time in months, yet no one is counting days by how much grain remains in a single sack. When the floodwaters rise in the low places outside town, and the dugouts along the creek take on icy seepage, Charles goes out with other men to shore up walls and lay planks over the worst stretches of road. He comes home with his boots soaked and his muscles trembling from shoveling heavy, wet snow out of the railway cuts so the next trains can keep coming. You mend the shredded tar paper of the claim shanty when weather allows, fingers working at a steadier pace now that they are not stiffened with cold and hunger. You think ahead to planting, to what can be coaxed from ground that has lain under deep snow for 7 months. You think too of Mary. In a few months, if all goes as hoped, she will leave this cramped room for a college for the blind in Iowa. You will pack her few dresses and her hair ribbons and the small, careful hopes you have for a future that does not depend on sight, and you will send her away because that is the only way she will get the education she deserves. The idea of parting from her makes your throat ache. The idea of her staying, locked forever in the narrow limits of this frontier life, makes it ache worse. You have learned too well that survival here is always a trade. Guess what will be remembered? Years from now, when the girls are grown and the claim has become a house with real walls instead of paper and hope, Laura will sit at a desk in another state entirely and put this winter onto paper. She will smooth its rough edges into chapters. She will compress weeks of grinding and waiting into a handful of scenes a child can understand. She'll turn the sound of your endless coffee mill into a single vivid image. She'll make a story from the way Almanzo and Cap rode out into the blizzard and came back with wheat enough to pull a town back from the brink. She will not lie, not exactly, but she will choose. She will choose which parts to set in the light and which to leave in the shadows. She will choose how hungry to make you all sound and how afraid. She will choose how much of your quiet fury, your exhaustion, your bone-deep weariness to let strangers see. Readers will learn about the blizzards, the blocked trains, the seed wheat, the boys on the sled. They will feel the drama of the storm and the relief of the whistle. Most of them will never think very long about the woman in the narrow upstairs room whose hands twisted hay until the skin split, whose arms turned the mill until the muscles burned, whose mind did the endless arithmetic of how to make not enough into just enough without ever letting the fear show on her face. They will not know that for every heroic ride into the white, there were 100 small unseen acts that kept children breathing through the dark. But you know, because you lived it. You stand at the window in Desmet that first clear evening after the trains have started to move again, the sky washed clean for the first time in months. The setting sun catches on the distant line of rails, a brief flash of metal that looks, from here, like a thread stitching this tiny town back into the wider world. Behind you, the girls are laughing over something small and ordinary. Grace's sticky fingers from a sliver of candy carries mock outrage at having to share. Beside you, Charles lifts his fiddle at last and draws the bow across the strings. The first notes are rusty, but the sound is still sweet. You close your eyes and listen. To the fiddle, to the murmur of your daughters' voices, to the faint fading echo of the train whistle that has already come and gone, leaving behind both more than you hoped and less than you will ever tell. Spring will bring its own troubles, debts to pay, land to break, crops that may or may not come in. Mary will leave, and the house will be quieter in a way that does not feel like peace. Almanzo Wilder will not always be just the young man who brought wheat. Those stories are waiting, just beyond the horizon. For tonight you stand in the little room that winter could not quite take from you, your family alive around you, and you let the music thread through the space where, not so long ago, all you could hear was the grind of a mill and the howl of the wind. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a question you do not yet have words for stirs. When your daughter finally writes this all down, which winter will the world believe? The one you survived, or the one she shapes from it? The answer lies in a future you cannot see. But after a season spent facing the blank, merciless white of the prairie, you have learned how much can be hiding in things you can't yet make out, and how much depends on who lives long enough to tell the story.